As we're being led to the barracks, a voice calls out for apprentice knight Chris. He steps out of his tent, only to find an unfamiliar man whose cold expression immediately puts him on guard. "And you are?" Chris asks cautiously. The man scoffs, his tone dripping with arrogance. "I am a disciple of Knight McCoy. You will follow me." "McCoy?" The casual use of his name seems to trigger the man. His eyes flash with anger. "How dare a commoner like you speak his name so freely?" Chris holds his ground. "We're both apprentice knights. There's no need for such formality." McCoy's disciple merely sneers. "If not for the strict orders of the one who summoned you," he hissed, "I would have already ripped out your throat." Chris simply nods. "All right then, all right." He's led through imposing stone structures, his mind racing. Why would the Kremlin be here, and who could have summoned it? They arrive at a room where a table is laden with a feast fit for a king. McCoy stops at the threshold. He throws a venomous glare at Chris and orders him inside. As Chris steps through the door, a familiar, chilling figure appears before him. It's the Count's son, a wide, unsettling smile plastered on his face. "It's been too long," he says with false warmth. "Apprentice Knight Chris greets you," Chris responds, maintaining a formal distance. The Count's son, swirling a glass of wine, gestures to a seat. Sit. This wine is from Hrad. It's exquisite, simply melts on the tongue." A glass is poured for Chris, but a sudden shiver runs down his spine. He cuts through the pleasantries. "Forgive my forwardness," he asks, his gaze steady. "But could you tell me the reason I was summoned?" The Count's son takes a slow sip of wine. "Don't be in such a hurry." He purrs, his voice unnervingly friendly. "I called you here to celebrate." He raises his glass. "To the hero of the battle, the one who tamed a manticore, a brave warrior, who rose from the dirt of a commoner to an apprentice knight." At first I couldn't accept it, but I realized my own stubbornness was blinding me. The Count's son's eyes scan Chris as if sizing up a prize. "I want to make you my man." He leans in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Do you want a promotion to a full knight? Or perhaps a title? Whatever you desire, I will grant it. Just say the word." The unsettling offer hangs in the air, thick with hidden meaning. Chris's mind reels. "What twisted game is this? You would promote me to a full knight?" he asks, his voice laced with suspicion. "And grant me a title just like that with no price to pay?" The Count's son's finger traces the rim of his glass. "Oh, but you can pay me back for such a gift, in your own way." The implication is clear, and a wave of disgust washes over Chris. This ridiculous charade won't work on him. The man's twisted desires are written all over his face. "Thank you for the offer," Chris replies. He bows, slightly, a polite but firm smile on his face. "But I wish to achieve everything with my own strength. Still, I am grateful. Yet, for the invitation, the food and wine were excellent." The Count's son's friendly mask finally cracks, his eyes turning to ice. "You won't regret this decision," he asks, his voice dangerously low. Chris stands tall. "I will not. My mind is made up. Please forgive me." With that, Chris turns to leave. The Count's son says nothing, only allowing him to go. But as the door closes, his teeth grit in silent fury, his eyes burning with hatred. Walking through the palace, Chris crosses his arms, a deep sense of unease settling over him. A cold shiver runs down his spine. The look on the Count's son's face was like a predator that had just been denied its prey. The next day arrives. Chris stands before Strick, who is examining a document. "What have you been up to lately?" Strick asks without looking up. The question catches Chris off guard. "What do you mean?" Strick finally looks at him. "I have a mission for you. You will leave for Hagard in 2 days." He adds ominously, "You're in deep, kid." Chris can only stare back, completely bewildered. Later, sitting on his bed, he examines some papers. Lynn appears peering over his shoulder. "Security detail for the third prince. What did that maniac forget here?" Chris replies, "They say it's to express his gratitude for our victory in the last battle." Lynn scoffs. "Gratitude, I once heard the prince was stung by a bee, and because his knight couldn't stop it, the prince had the man's hand cut off. It's true, he's completely unhinged." Lynn's eyes then fall on the paper in Chris's hand. "Wait, is that a list?" "Of the Defender Corps members." Chris nods. "Yes, but our names aren't on it." A wave of relief washes over Lynn. "Yes." He shouts a little too loudly. Chris shoots him a glare. As he walks through the forest, his mind is a whirlwind of thoughts. 2 days to prepare, and he still needs more information. He frowns. Even though the third prince has a terrible reputation, the mission itself doesn't seem that difficult. He suspects the Count's son holds a grudge against him, and pulled strings to assign him this dangerous task. Arriving at his tent, he's met by one of his men. The soldier is holding a box. "Master, you've returned." But Chris barely registers him, his eyes locking onto Fox. "I have something to ask you." Fox turns, revealing a fresh, ugly bruise on his face. "What is it?" But Chris's attention is fixed on the injury. "What happened to your face?" Chris's glare was ice. "I told you exactly what to do," he stated coldly, "and this is what you bring me." "I thought it would work this time," Fox stammered. Chris slammed a scroll on the table. "Enough, we're done." Review this list, he commanded. If you find anything even remotely suspicious, you report to me immediately. Fox began to read. McCoy is a knight, Fox reported. Everyone else is from the 100-man squads. I don't see any particular problems here. Chris scrutinized him. And what about those who served on V's side? Fox replied firmly. There are none. A thought sparked in Chris's mind. Fox might be a rowdy boy, but he was still a prince. The list of defenders? It felt engineered. Far too few men and not enough knights. The whole thing was suspiciously clean. Then a chilling realization dawned on him. They wanted something to happen. This wasn't a protection detail. It was a trap. Chris's orders were sharp. Dismiss everyone. Send them to High Guard. Investigate every non-native who seems out of place. Dave, you do the same. Fox protested. But my lord, countless people pass through those two cities. It will be impossible to check all of them. Chris raised a single finger, silencing him. Then I will set the conditions. Find me those whose talents and skills are far beyond the usual. As he turned to leave, Chris added, and bring me more wires and kell drops. Fox bowed. I obey. We're taken to Tackwell, who eyed Chris skeptically. What's this about the third prince's security? Did you do something wrong again? Chris just offered a placid smile. No. He stretched out his arms, and Tackwell simply stared back. What do you want? Tackwell asked. Chris's question was direct. How do you fight an opponent who is overwhelmingly stronger than you? You run, Tackwell said flatly. Chris was baffled. And what if you can't run? What are you getting at? Tackwell pressed. Chris leaned in. Do you have an ace up your sleeve? Tackwell nodded. Of course. Chris's face lit up with joy. I knew it. Tackwell continued, his voice monotone. My ace is hard training and daily conditioning. Chris's hope immediately crashed. Ellis doesn't like boring proper dads. She wants an interesting dad, someone who can be a friend. Tackwell shoved a spear into his hands. What does Ellis have to do with this? He grumbled. Take the spear. It's not a secret weapon, but I'll teach you a few useful tricks. Chris smiled, gripping the spear tightly. By the way, he asked, why did you grab a spear too? He had a sinking feeling he shouldn't have mentioned Ellis. Tackwell's reply was grim. You learn faster in a spar. Looking at the formidable warrior, Chris panicked. But in 2 days, I'm leaving with the Defender Corps. I can't get injured. Tackwell's eyes glinted. I understand. But Chris's pleading only seemed to encourage him more. Later, Chris sits at a bar, lost in his thoughts. He closes his eyes, then spins around on his stool. What are the results? He asked. A figure handed him a small note. This information is from High Guard. The man in the black hood leaned closer. Regarding high-class fighters in High Guard, we've confirmed 5. In Da, there are 4. Chris pondered the numbers. A squad of 10 was far too small for a kidnapping. Something much bigger was happening. He turned to Fox. There's one more thing you need to prepare. Deep in the woods, a furious voice erupts. McCoy grabs his head and screams, Why? Why did they put that jerk in charge over me? I come from a noble family, he seethed. Nearby, Chris sat with a calm, knowing smile. He turned to McCoy, his smirk widening. If you believe it's so unfair, then earn your position on the battlefield. McCoy glared with pure hatred, but said nothing. Chris then stood before the troops and shouted, All members of the Defender Corps, we march to High Guard now. The soldiers moved out in a steady, disciplined line. As they trekked through the sweltering forest, one soldier muttered to another, This equipment, in this weather, I'm going to die of stuffiness. His comrade shot him a warning look. Keep your voice down, or he'll hear you. Suddenly, Chris's head snapped toward the bushes. He raised a hand. Stop! McCoy scoffed. What is it now? Chris stared intently into the trees. I thought I saw a goblin. McCoy laughed. Don't be ridiculous. This is triangle territory. At that moment, a soldier pointed, and they all saw them 4 green goblins with burning red eyes. McCoy froze in shock. What in the hell are those monsters doing here? Chris's voice cut through the panic. Does it matter right now? A soldier charged with his spear. Prepare for an attack. They crashed into the goblins, aiming to eliminate the group quickly. A few minutes later, Chris stood over the goblin corpses. McCoy looked at them, his expression utterly bewildered. Seriously, where did these things come from? He asked. And why so many? But Chris suspected this was only the beginning. This confirmed it. The triangle was suspiciously connected to the 3 cities under the Count's rule. The constant guard presence was a dead giveaway. They were preparing for incursions from bandits and monsters. Chris glanced at his men. He couldn't help but wonder what was going on. On the very first day of their protection detail, something strange was already afoot. All right, let's take a short break, Chris announced, dropping a bag of rope. A creature named Pumpkin ran up to Chris barking. He looked at it warmly, stroking its muzzle, which was smeared with blood. You're a good boy, he praised. A perfect fit for this team. So it had already made a kill. Chris wondered if this was the same beast he had hunted in the night. Regardless, it was clearly a natural predator. As Pumpkin wagged its tail merrily, Chris knew what he had to do first. They would start by putting the wire back in its place. When he returned to camp, McCoy glared at him. "And where has our so-called commander been?" Chris glanced around casually. "I was meeting with princes." He feigned a pained expression. "It seems I was so nervous." "I came down with a bad case of diarrhea." McCoy waved a hand in front of his face. "That's disgusting," he spat. Chris just smiled. "Everyone on your feet, we're resuming our journey." The soldiers moved through the forest, casting wary glances at the bushes. Chris watched the path ahead intently, then suddenly yelled, "Again! Everyone prepare for battle, goblins ahead!" McCoy shot Chris a disappointed look, sighing, "Not again." Chris and his soldiers were already finishing off the last of them. McCoy glanced at Chris with frustration. "At this rate, we won't reach Highguard by nightfall." "You're right," Chris agreed, looking around. "We'll spend the night here. We move out at dawn. Let everyone get some rest." McCoy looked at Chris in disbelief. "What kind of heresy is this?" he roared. Chris met his fury with a calm smile. "I know I can't force my men into a strict march." "Right after a life-or-death battle against monsters?" McCoy scoffed. "A life-or-death battle, we'll all be dead." "If we arrive at our destination late, messenger boy." Chris's smile turned mischievous as he let out a laugh. "It seems you've forgotten something, McCoy. Who exactly is the head of this squad?" McCoy gritted his teeth, seething. Night fell. McCoy saw the men getting out their sleeping bags. "What do you all think you're doing?" he demanded. A soldier gave him a puzzled look. "Commander Chris ordered us to be ready to spend the night in the open, sir." Lying in his own sleeping bag, Chris called out, "I figured you didn't quite understand how the world works, McCoy. One must always be prepared." The soldier looked at McCoy. "Shall I get a sleeping bag for you, sir?" McCoy just scowled. "I can manage." From his comfy position, Chris smirked at him. "You're welcome to join me." Those words made McCoy snap. "I'll kill you," he snarled. "I swear one day I will kill you." A shout of warning pierced the dawn. Chris sat up instantly. "Everyone on your feet, move out faster. We're continuing our journey." Standing behind him, McCoy spat on the ground. "Like a bunch of insects," he muttered. Chris calmly replied without turning around. "We're here." Before them was the bridge leading to the castle. A soldier came out to meet them. After a firm handshake, he said, "I've heard a great deal about you, Commander Chris." "By the way, you're later than planned. Did something happen on the way?" Chris replied. "We encountered a group of goblins." "That forced us to delay our march," the soldier asked, puzzled. "Goblins inside the triangle." Chris answered smoothly. "There weren't many. I assume they were chased here from somewhere else." The soldier sighed. "I see. Well, as long as you're all right, I'm glad." Chris then asked, "When is the prince expected to arrive?" "It should be very soon," the soldier replied, just as he spotted a large carriage in the distance. It was led by a man in golden armor. "It looks like they're here now." Someone shouted, "Make way for the prince." The carriage led by the golden knight drove up to Chris. He stepped forward and declared, "My name is Chris. I have received orders from Count Ludwig to lead the defense team." The carriage door opened, and the prince began to step down. He looked down his nose at Chris and ordered, "Look up." He was just a boy with a disgruntled face dressed in a simple brown shirt. Chris was stunned. He was far younger than he had imagined. The boy frowned. "What are you staring at?" "Do you want me to rip out your eyes for disrespecting your superiors?" This boy was the third Prince Chiriaco de Gouche. The prince turned to Chris with a sneer. "So you're the so-called hero of the battlefield. I thought you'd be more impressive. But you're nothing special after all." He shouted to his knight, "Nelson, we're leaving." A portly, red-haired man then approached Chris. He looked at Chris with clear displeasure. "I am San, the one responsible for Highguard." Zion greeted him, stating it was an honor, then informed Chris that all preparations were complete. They were ready to depart immediately. With everything in order, their journey could finally begin. Chris glanced at him, thinking to himself, was this guy telling him to escort this human time bomb out of town? Chris gave a reluctant thumbs up. He declared that from this moment on they would secure the entire convoy. The prince's carriage began to move, flanked by marching soldiers. One of them, looking utterly bewildered, glanced over his shoulder as his comrade whispered, urging him to continue his story. The soldier tried to recall where he'd left off. Ah, yes. He stared down the road and began again. After burying her dead husband's crown, she returned home, only to find him alive sitting in the living room, his face radiating an unnatural vigor. From the shadows of the trees, a pair of red eyes blinked open. The soldier's story went on. He said his wife saw her husband's ghastly form and collapsed on the spot from pure terror. "And then what happened?" his friend asked eagerly. But before he could answer, an assassin burst from the bushes. The soldier continued saying everything ended just as it was meant to. Suddenly, 2 more ninjas flew from the foliage, their katanas flashing as they decapitated the soldiers. A survivor screamed, "It's an ambush!" Chris spun around, his brow furrowed. The real battle had just begun, 3 ninjas, advanced blades drawn. Another soldier yelled that enemies had also appeared at the front lines, engaging their vanguard. Chris roared his command. "Everyone hold your formation. Rear guard protect the prince's carriage at all costs. Front line annihilate the enemy before you." With that, Chris turned his attention to the assassins closing in. He moved to finish one of them, but another enemy was already closing in from behind katana raised high. Chris spun a flash of surprise on his face, then slammed the shaft of his spear into the ninja's shoulder with incredible force. The terrified ninja blocked with his arm, thinking in shock. Even the shaft of this spear is made of solid iron. Chris swung his weapon, yelling, "McCoy, don't you dare die on me!" McCoy, parrying a blow, shouted back, "Just try not to mess this up, Chris." Chris's eyes darted forward. Standing before him, leading the attack, was Nelson. He realized there were far more enemies than he'd anticipated. Even Lord Nelson was struggling to defend himself alone. 2 more assassins were charging straight for Chris. He had to end this quickly and get back on the road. The ninjas closed in, but Chris was already focusing his energy, preparing to unleash his full power. He remembered Tackwell's words, that with his mastery of the spear, he could perfectly execute this next technique. A skill designed for fighting against overwhelming numbers. A move said to be as fluid and deadly as a snake's tongue. Chris's spear became a blur in his hands, flexible as a ribbon, and glowing with power as it instantly struck down the 2 ninjas. He lunged forward, but a sudden shout pierced the air. "The prince!" Chris's head snapped to the side, startled. A ninja held a blade to the young prince's throat. With tears in his eyes, the prince cried out, Nelson!" In response, Chris's spear became a blur. A second later, it pierced through the assassin's heart. The prince stared in horror, trembling with fear before letting out a scream as another ninja rushed toward him. Chris immediately dropped to the ground, his hands digging into the earth. He recalled another of Tackwell's lessons, the next tactic, a state like a palm tree leaping would allow him to land an attack that would utterly shatter his enemy. Chris dug his heels into the ground, realizing what he had to do. He had to lower his stance, gather all his strength into his feet, and channel that immense pressure into the earth itself. Then he launched himself forward like a bolt of lightning. He shot past the prince in a gust of wind and slammed into the ninja with a single, devastating blow, smashing him into a tree. The impact shattered the ninja's mask as he coughed up blood, a technique known as dash. Chris faced the remaining ninja, who held his katana ready. The assassin lunged his blade, striking Chris's arm. "Is that all you've got?" Chris thought, seeing that the blade had barely grazed his skin. He drove his elbow into the ninja's side, sending the dagger flying. He turned to the prince. "Are you all right?" But the boy just screamed in disgust. "Of course I'm not all right." At that moment, Lord Nelson's voice rang out. While felling another ninja, he shouted, "Chris, just go! Understanding!" Chris grabbed the stunned prince. He yelled back, "We'll meet you in Daytona by evening." But 2 more ninjas were already charging them, furious. "You think you can escape?" they screamed. In response, Chris slammed a smoke bomb at his feet. The ninjas stopped, bewildered by the thick smoke. One of them growled, "What good is a smoke screen?" His comrade shouted back, "Damn it, I can't see a thing." Suddenly, one of the ninjas spotted movement through the haze. He pointed a finger towards the woods where Chris was escaping. "They're after him!" he roared. Chris raced through the forest at full speed, carrying the prince in his arms. Just then, a creature called Pumpkin ran up to the inn, causing the prince to shriek in terror. Chris glanced at the startled boy and calmly said, "It was all a blur. He was raising a wolf." The prince screamed, pointing at the beast he desperately wanted. Then he pointed back. "They're almost on us!" he shrieked. Chris struggled to control the reins, trying to ignore the prince's panicked jolts. He couldn't even see the road properly. "Just shut up," he pleaded internally. "Please, just don't make this worse." Glancing away for a second, he spotted a goblin's corpse in the bushes. Had they stumbled into a monster hunting ground, the assassins relentlessly pursued them. "Take the shortcut," one of them yelled. "We have to catch them." Suddenly, a smokescreen billowed in front of the pursuing ninjas. "Damn it, another one of these," one cursed. A ninja charged ahead, completely missing the taut fishing line. "Hurry, clear a path, and advance," he ordered. In that same instant, 2 of his comrades ran throat first into the invisible trap. They collapsed without a sound. The remaining ninjas stared in horror at their fallen allies, blood pooling beneath them. "He set up traps." One of them sliced the line, shouting, "Stay vigilant, don't let your guard down for a second." Just then, another cry echoed out. Puzzled, the ninjas looked over. What now? They saw their comrades on the ground, clutching their legs amidst scattered caltrops. "He scattered caltrops on the ground!" one of them yelled in frustration. The lead ninja calmly assessed the situation. "This won't work," he declared. "Dio, take the wounded and retreat from here." The ninja named Deo protested, "But I can still fight." The leader's eyes flashed with cold fury. "Use your head for once," he snarled. "If even one of the wounded gets captured, we're all compromised." Dio finally relented. "Understood." The leader then glared at the caltrops and commanded the rest. "Follow me." The ninja chief sprinted forward, his brow furrowed in deep thought. The more he considered it, the more absurd it seemed. "What kind of knight," he muttered, "carries caltrops in his pocket?" Chris raced onward, the prince in tow. He glanced back. The assassins were still on their tail. They were persistent. How many were left? Chris checked his supplies. The caltrops and smoke traps were all gone. Suddenly, Pumpkin skidded to a halt, turning to face the pursuers. Chris stared confused. The ninjas charged forward, swords drawn and ready to strike. "What is that thing?" the leader roared. "Destroy it!" But then the creature opened its mouth, and hellfire erupted from its jaws. It unleashed a devastating torrent of flame, incinerating everything in its path. Chris and the prince could only watch, stunned. "What in the world have I been raising all this time?" Chris whispered in disbelief. As evening fell, they found a place to hide. Chris sat beside the prince. "We'll rest here for a bit." The prince gestured angrily. "Are you insane? They're chasing us. We have to leave now." Chris held up his hand, slick with blood. "And if we keep going?" he asked calmly. "How do I stop this bleeding?" The prince's eyes widened in fear. "Blood?" He quickly composed himself. "It's fine. It's nothing." Chris looked at him intently. "By any chance, do you know the way to Dat?" The prince scoffed defensively. "How would I know? We should be moving." He watched Chris, a new fear creeping in. What if this man just abandons me right here? Chris sat silently, lost in thought. The prince decided his best bet was to stick with him. "Can you—" the prince began. "Can you guarantee my safety?" Chris placed a hand over his heart, stood up, and gave a solemn vow. "Of course. As long as you trust me, Your Highness, I will protect you with my very life." The prince stared in awe. "Wow." But in that moment, two ninjas appeared from the shadows behind him. "There they are," one shouted. The terrified prince grabbed Chris's shoulder. "You can stop them, right? Say you can." "Don't worry," Chris replied, his voice unnervingly calm. The two remaining assassins held their blades, their eyes fixed on him. Chris calculated the odds. Pumpkin must have taken out the others. It was just these two left. "I need to end this, and fast." He unstrapped his armor, stating plainly, "I'm a simple man. If I think I'm going to lose, I run." The ninja leader looked at him bewildered. "What are you talking about?" Chris let his armor clatter to the ground. "Rushing at you unarmed would be utterly insane, right?" A dangerous glint entered his eyes. "But for some reason, I have a feeling I can take you." The ninjas took their stances, the leader sneering. "It's because you've already been beaten back." Chris, who had just evaded an attack, smirked. "I haven't been hit once." Then he moved. Chris exploded forward, his fist smashing into one of the ninjas with bone-shattering force, sending the man flying back several meters. He instantly pivoted, glaring at the leader, as he drove a devastating punch into his side. Both ninjas were now on the ground meters away, staring at him in utter shock. The leader looked up, his face a mask of menacing disbelief. Clutching his side, Chris roared the order to retreat, his gaze cold as steel locked onto the ninja chief. An assassin stalked toward him. The chief's mind reeled. He had completely misjudged this man. He'd been on his feet for hours. Carrying the prince, no less. His stamina should have been long gone. So where did this monstrous power, this impossible speed come from? The ninja chief coughed up blood, a bitter realization dawning. So this was the famed hero of the battlefield. They were hopelessly outmatched. The assassin watched as Chris calmly flexed his hands, a terrifying thought echoing in his mind. This wasn't a man. He was a monster. Chris stood like an unmovable wall before them, the smiling prince safe behind him. The ninjas locked eyes in a silent mutual understanding. In a flash, they scattered in opposite directions. The prince, clearly impressed, scoffed. "How dare they," he sneered, "target a member of the royal family?" But Chris's mind was already racing. They weren't simple assassins. They were mercenaries hired by someone with immense power. He needed to capture one for interrogation, but he couldn't leave the prince alone. The prince approached him. "You're good," he admitted. "Maybe even better than my own royal guards." Chris offered a faint smile. "Your Highness is too kind." "No, I'm serious. Your speed was breathtaking," the prince insisted. But Chris was focused on the bigger picture. What was their true objective? By abducting a prince, they weren't just attacking a person, but the honor of the royal family itself. And there was only one man with the audacity for such a scheme. The king's own younger brother. The man who would soon ignite a bloody civil war. Duke Banter R. Gage. Elsewhere in a hidden location, a ninja knelt before a shadowy figure. The seated man's voice was like ice. "So, you failed?" The kneeling assassin could only apologize for his incompetence. From the shadows emerged Rao's Ben, the duke's most fearsome warrior. "A complete failure," he mused, his brow furrowed in contempt. To be thwarted on such a simple mission, by a single knight's apprentice, the duke would be displeased. "Enough," Ben declared. "I will handle this myself. Prepare my weapon and my mask." He clenched his fist, a grim determination in his eyes. This enemy was cunning and swift. He would not be underestimated. "I will use my full strength." Back in the forest, Chris turned to the prince. "Your Highness, there is something we must discuss." "What is it now? Can't we just get moving?" "Actually," Chris stated calmly, "we will be waiting here for the night before we proceed." The prince was instantly irritated. "Why?" Chris closed his eyes. "Does your Highness desire the harsh truth, or a comfortable lie to preserve your peace of mind?" The prince's anger flared. "Stop playing games and just tell me..." Chris turned his expression grave. Our enemies knew the exact time and place of your arrival. Doesn't your highness find that strange? The prince stared, taken aback. What are you trying to imply? Chris let the question hang in the air. They ambushed us the very moment you appeared. No one could have known that information. Unless they were intimately familiar with your travel plans? He looked the prince dead in the eye. What if the traitor is someone we trust? The prince's mind began to churn. He finally spoke, his voice low. Are you accusing Count Ludwig? Chris lowered his head slightly. I wouldn't dare. The Count is a sincere man, a loyal protector of our borders. Then what are you trying to say? The prince demanded, his frustration growing. Speak plainly, he snapped, clenching his fists. This is merely my own speculation, Chris replied carefully. Without direct proof, I must choose my words with caution. But the prince stood firm. I will not punish an innocent man. It doesn't matter whose name you speak. Chris smiled faintly. The prince had passed the test. There is someone, Chris began, who knew every detail of our plan. Someone who gave the bandits their instructions. The prince's patience was wearing thin. You're testing me. If you keep dragging this out, I'll tear out your tongue myself. Chris's voice was steady. It's Count Ludwig's eldest son. The prince froze, staring at Chris in disbelief. His eldest son? Yes, Chris confirmed. He knew every detail of the Defender Squad's plans, and he was the one who personally assigned me to this post. The prince stared, connecting the dots. But weren't you sent because you're a top fighter? Chris shook his head. Be that as it may, my skills are officially considered insufficient. To be assigned as a royal protector. The prince processed this, then looked Chris in the eye. No, you're more than enough. You've already proven that. A dark understanding dawned on his face. So the eldest son? I see. I will keep my promise. You have no need to worry. The prince stepped away, crossing his arms. Fine. Staying here one night makes no difference to me. I informed Lord Nelson we would arrive by evening, Chris explained. This was a deliberate tactic to mislead our enemy. By spending the night here, Chris continued, we can avoid any unexpected ambushes on the road ahead. Think about it. Many travel to the fortress, but very few would ever camp in this forest. The prince let out a short, understanding laugh. With his stomach rumbling, the prince glanced at Chris. A warm smile met his gaze as Chris suggested they eat first. A small campfire crackled beside them while the prince lay in a sleeping bag. Chris was keeping watch by the fire when the prince broke the silence. Thank you. When Chris called him a good man, the prince's eyes widened. He confessed Chris was the first person to ever say that. Everyone else simply shied away from him. Chris's smile was reassuring. That's because they don't know the real you. They haven't seen your kindness and compassion. The prince laughed, dismissing it as nonsense. Just then, Pumpkin burst from the bushes. Chris turned to his companion, his voice full of praise. You did an amazing job today. He patted the creature with a grin, promising a delicious feast when they got home. But he added a firm warning. By the way, that fire trick, don't ever do it again without my command. Pumpkin let out a small bark. Chris raised a finger to his lips. Shh, the prince is fast asleep. They had agreed to take turns on watch duty. Now Chris sat under a tree, his arms crossed. With his eyes closed, he took stock of his progress 49 throwing points. His thoughts turned to his master Takel. He was certain that once he hit 50 points, something monumental would change. Takel's training depended on these skills. The difference between 30 and 40 points was already like night and day. Closing his eyes, Chris thought he could finally rest. As he drifted off, a dream pulled him back into his harsh training. Crack Takel's club slammed into his head. His master's voice was stern. Learning this in a day is impossible. Chris rubbed his throbbing head. But can I do it? Takeel gripped his sword, his gaze piercing. Of course, but this child's play with sticks is over. We're moving on to real blades, Chris protested, but I have to leave tomorrow. So many had already died for nothing. He had to find his family. Takel's face was grim. Then be careful. Your intuition might save you from a stray arrow. But not from a master's sword. In a flash, Takel's blade grazed Chris's arm. Feel your opponent's breath. His voice, the whisper of steel cutting the air. You must sense it all. Takel pointed his sword right at Chris. He knew the boy possessed a rare talent. Don't block it, dodge. You never know what kind of weapon the enemy might be using. Chris collapsed, exhausted. Master, are we finished yet? Takel was inwardly astonished. For someone so young, his senses were already incredibly sharp. His intuition was on another level. That kind of sixth sense is usually only gained by staring death in the face. Truly amazing. This is the last one, Takel declared. But you promised, Chris cried out. In that moment, a chilling premonition washed over him in the dream. It felt as if his arm was being sliced clean off. Chris jolted awake, standing before his master again, utterly baffled. What was that? Takel's expression was deadly serious. That was Sal, your killing intent, a power every true knight must possess. It is a special energy that projects your will to kill. As you can see, I didn't even move. Looking at the terrified Chris, he asked, What did you feel everyone perceives this energy differently? For some, it's a change in the opponent's breathing. Chris clutched his shoulder. I don't understand. It just felt like a sword appeared out of nowhere. Startled, he looked around as Takel's voice echoed. You don't have to. Understand it all at once. Understanding comes with practice. Suddenly, Chris snapped back to reality, shouting in pure terror. Prince, get up. We have an enemy. A figure emerged from the shadows, its voice cutting through the night. Who are you, to be able to sense Sal at such a young age? The prince knew they were in deep trouble. It was real killing energy. Chris glanced at the assassin. His only weapon was a short sword. This was bad. There was no way he could win this fight. As he stared, he saw faint sparks of lightning crackling around the ninja's body. An elemental user, the assassin stood before a frozen Chris. Pumpkin let out a furious growl, but Chris shouted at his companion. Stop, go protect the prince, he ordered. And Prince, just run in a straight line, go. Puzzled, the prince crossed his arms. Why he came alone? Just get rid of him. Chris's face was a mask of desperation. He's on a completely different level from anyone we've faced before. The prince froze. Seeing the terror in Chris's eyes, he whispered, Okay. The ninja only sneered. If the little prince runs, I'll tear off his legs. The prince collapsed to the ground in fright. Chris grit his teeth. Was his plan a failure? He frantically scanned the area. This elemental power. What could he possibly do against it? In a blur, the ninja appeared right in front of him, sword swinging down. Tell me, boy, how much is your life worth? Chris glanced down at the blade, startled. It was too close. There was no time to dodge. But in a flash of steel, Gillen appeared blocking the ninja's sword with his own. Chris could only stare, bewildered. The assassin, stunned by the sudden interruption, leaped back to create distance. Gillen faced forward and smirked. Well now, he mused. It seems even you can feel fear, Chris. He then turned his gaze to the prince, his voice booming. All hail the noble and wise Prince Siri. Please forgive my unrefined greeting, but the circumstances were quite dire. I have come from Dave under the orders of Count Ludwig to ensure your safety. My name is Gillen. Chris glanced aside, noticing a very disgruntled fox. Gillen held up a hand, shouting, Guards, do not interfere. Your duty is to protect the prince. Chris stared down at the sword scabbard in his hands, puzzled as Gillen warned him. Don't you dare lose that. It's worth more than your life. Gillen's eyes narrowed on the ninja. I see why Chris was struggling now. A predatory smile crossed his face. This one's the real deal. Let's see what you're made of. In an instant, they both exploded it into action. Gillen swung his blade with immense force matched perfectly by the assassin. Their duel was a blur of motion, their speed almost unimaginable. Sparks flew as their blades clashed in a furious dance. The nearby guards could only watch the high-level battle in absolute horror. One of them gasped, Incredible! The other replied, his voice trembling. Gillen is striking 3 times in a single second. But Chris, watching intently, knew the truth. No, it's definitely more than 10. If it weren't for my training with Tackwell, I wouldn't have been able to see a single strike. A system message then materialized before his eyes, throwing skill 52. What was happening? Gillen, wielding a single sword, was pushing back the ninja, who defended with 2. Chris wondered, could it be Weiss? Gillen stared into his opponent's eyes. He's stronger, but am I faster, he thought. In a long battle, I can wear him down and crush him. But just then, blood suddenly erupted from Gillen's shoulder, and then from his leg. The ninja had landed 2 clean hits with a flurry of blindingly fast swings. Gillen's eyes hardened, calculating. As the assassin lunged forward for the final blow, Gillen saw it. This is my chance. The assassin's blade cut through the air like lightning, but Gillen thrust his own sword forward to meet it. He blocked the attack, and a crushing tension filled the air. The ninja stared back, his eyes wide with pure horror. Gillen pressed his advantage. The assassin's defense began to crack and shatter under the strain. With a deafening roar, Gillen unleashed his full power. His strike completely broke both of the ninja's swords. Dumbfounded, the assassin was sent flying. My blades! But Gillen didn't miss his chance. He leaped forward with incredible power, swinging his sword for the finishing blow. The ninja quickly adjusted his mask, only to realize it too was torn. He retreated instantly. I must escape, he thought. The mission is a failure. Gillen glared menacingly as the shadow fled. Guards after him. Later, Gillen was walking through the woods with Chris and the prince. Chris sheathed his sword, laughed, and teased. So this thing here is really worth more than my own life, huh? But Gillen remained stone-faced, and Chris's smile quickly faded. Just then, the Count's eldest son appeared before them. He looked past them to Fox, who was shielding the prince. Your Highness, thank the heavens you are safe and sound. From this moment on, the Ludwig Knight Squad will be personally responsible for your protection. The prince looked at the newcomer, confused. And who are you? The man bowed deeply. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the eldest son of Count Ludwig. My name is Vane Ludwig. The prince's eyes widened in surprise before a curious smile appeared. And what exactly does this mean? Vane simply replied, "The carriage has already arrived." As if on cue, Fox passed by carrying the prince on his shoulders. The prince turned around with a bright smile and waved. "We'll meet again, Squire Chris." Chris bowed respectfully. "Yes, Your Highness." He shot a hostile glare at the Count's son, who met it with a condescending smirk. Vane's jaw tightened in silent fury. Later, back in a tent, Chris was lying on a bed with Pumpkin perched next to him. He smiled, thinking, no matter how you look at it, home really is the best place. But his peace was shattered the next morning by someone yelling, "Get out here now!" Chris wiped the sleep from his face. "McCoy, what's all the shouting about this early?" He stumbled out of the tent. He was still half asleep. "McCoy, I know I was late, but really is our friendship not enough to forgive that?" In that moment, cold steel clamped around his wrists. Chris stared down at the handcuffs, completely bewildered, as McCoy began to read from a scroll. "By decree of Count Ludwig, you, Chris, are hereby placed under arrest as a suspect in this case." Chris gave a startled look at the cuffs. McCoy continued, "Regarding the recent attack on the third prince." Chris looked up utterly baffled and asked, "What?" Surrounded by soldiers, Chris was led away in chains. He raised his cuffed hands, his mind reeling. "I can't believe this. I'm being arrested." He looked toward the path ahead, a dark realization dawning on him. All this time, I was only guessing at the bigger picture. So this was his grand scheme, to shift all the blame onto him. Chris's current position made him the perfect scapegoat. This was the true nature of that vile man. Just then, Doi spotted his commander being led away in chains, bound like a common criminal. "Commander!" he roared. Chris saw the fury blazing in Doi's eyes. "Why are you taking our commander?" Doi lunged forward, but Lin forcefully held him back. "Calm down," she hissed. Chris offered a reassuring smile. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll be back soon." But Lin's gaze was hard, her mind racing. What in the world is happening? They watched as Chris was escorted, straight towards a heavy door. A fellow disciple stood guard, blocking the path. "The trial will be held here," he announced grimly. He then lowered his head, whispering to Chris, "I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do." Chris just smiled faintly. "You're worried about me, aren't you?" He straightened his back, his pride unbroken. A knight should enter with his head held high. With that, he approached the door. A soldier emotionlessly beckoned him inside. As long as he knew his own truth, his heart wouldn't waver. He stepped into a vast chamber filled with seated figures. And in the center sat the Count's son. Whispers erupted from all sides. "So he has finally appeared?" "That must be him." Countless eyes fixated on Chris. He calmly scanned the room, his gaze steady. "So it has begun." He had arrived. The Count himself entered, followed by another man, and took his seat. Seated with the Count was Stein, the leader of the night squad. The Count's voice echoed, "Let us begin." "We must understand the full details of this incident." The Count's son smirked as Chris was presented before him. In the end, he began, "The Ludwig Night Squad rescued the three princes and completed their task. However, a shadow crossed his face. I suspected something was deeply wrong." He raised his head, his eyes glinting. "Our enemies could not have infiltrated our territory unnoticed. From this, I could only conclude one thing. There is a traitor in our midst." Chris listened, his expression like stone. The son continued, "Under the circumstances, I placed Knight Disciple Chris under surveillance, and his actions were far too suspicious. He rarely stayed in the barracks as a disciple should. Instead, he was frequently spotted heading into the city." The accusations flowed like poison as Chris stood silently before the Count. "We witnessed Chris meeting with the city's lowlifes. It was also confirmed he was staying at the home of an unidentified man." Chris's mind reeled. "They even found my master. I tried so hard to keep him hidden." Outrage began to boil within him as the lies continued. "This is why I believe this squire is in league with our enemies. He conspired with them, planned this entire incident. He threatened the honor and the very lives of the royal family. Such a heinous crime is worthy only of execution." "What a rotten bastard," Chris thought, his fists clenched. The Count turned his gaze to Chris. "Can you reveal the identity of this man you were staying with?" There was only one path forward. The truth. Looking the Count in the eye, Chris spoke. "The man's name is Tuel. He is a former member of the Royal Guard who came here from the capital." The Count nodded slowly. "I know of him. This clears up that particular suspicion." The Count's son, clearly furious, shot a glare at Chris. "I'm listening," he spat. Another noble, a man with a dark mustache, spoke up. "But is there a motive, a reason for Chris to plan such a thing?" The Baron's son smiled a predator's grin. "Of course there is. He wished to raise his own reputation. By saving the third prince. After all, he has already declared his ambition for a promotion." Chris bowed his head. "He's fabricated this entire story. He's prepared a counter for every possible truth I could speak." In their eyes, he was just a puppet. He could feel their mocking gazes, hear their silent laughter. He had been completely outplayed. The truth didn't matter in this place. This was nothing but a pre-written stage play. It was a perfect trap. Chris looked at the smiling faces around him. A den of vipers. "They can't execute me," he reasoned. "Not with Gillen sitting beside the Count. The Count wouldn't dispose of a skilled warrior so easily. But, best case scenario, I'll be exiled, forced to live in the shadows. Everything I've worked for, everything I've achieved here, will be for nothing. At that very moment, a loud banging echoed from the chamber doors. Chris's head snapped up. Shouts erupted from outside. "You cannot enter!" the guards yelled. But a furious voice roared back. "Do you have any idea who I am? Let go of me! Take your hands off me now!" And with a mighty crash, the doors were kicked wide open. Standing there with a piece of meat still in his hand was the third Prince Edict, looking thoroughly annoyed. The doors creak open, revealing an unexpected guest. Everyone recognizes him instantly. The third prince himself. It been looming, after which Prince 3 steps forward while Chris watches him and is embarrassed telling Chris how, but Chris simply bows his head. "It is an honor to see you again, Your Highness." In response, the prince scoffs, tossing a piece of meat across the table to a lesser noble. "Here," he sneers, "a gift from your prince, like feeding a dog." The noble scrambles to thank him for the scrap. The prince just chews his food unimpressed, his gaze then shifting to the man in charge. He stares down the Count, a silent challenge. The Count meets his gaze for a moment, before respectfully looking away. The prince saunters over to the Count's side. "I trust you have no issue with me observing this little trial?" It wasn't a question but a declaration. The Count, cornered, can only agree. The prince plops down between him and the knight captain, immediately showing his contempt for the proceedings. He kicks his feet up onto the table with a loud sigh. A wave of tension suffocates the room. Everyone holds their breath. Then the prince speaks, his eyes still closed. "Let's end this farce. Chris is innocent." The room erupts in silent shock. The Baron's son looks utterly dumbfounded. "But Chris?" Chris just smiles. The Count remains perfectly still, listening. The foolish son whispers urgently to his father. "He's trying to manipulate you. He just wants to win your favor." The prince's eyes snap open, filled with scorn. "What nonsense are you spouting now?" he declares again. "I said Chris is innocent." The Baron's son, flustered, tries to stand his ground. "Your Highness, this is a formal trial, governed by the king's law." The prince's face darkens with fury. "Are your ears blocked?" he roars. "It wasn't your man who was attacked. It was me. And where were you when it happened? Staggering around uselessly, I imagine." The prince's words cut deep. The Baron's son begins to tremble with rage. He grits his teeth, utterly humiliated. "Chris was the one who saved my life," the prince declares. "And you dare try to execute him." But you are a prince, Your Highness." The prince slams his hands on the table and leaps to his feet. He points a trembling finger at the foolish noble. "I saw that look in your eyes. That was insubordination." He turns to his knight. "Tear out this cretin's eyes. I feel my life is in danger." The knight captain beside him doesn't move a muscle. He's deliberately ignoring the entire situation. The prince then bellows at his own royal guard. "What are you waiting for? Do it! Gouge out his eyes. He has insulted royalty." The prince's words hang in the air like a death sentence. The prince's knight closes his eyes, burdened by the order. He slowly approaches the Baron's son, who stands frozen in pure terror. "No, please stop. I take it all back." Panic sets in as the knight begins to draw his blade. "Don't come any closer. Stop this madness." His jaw hangs open, his mind reeling from the shock. He turns to the Count, his voice cracking. "Father?" Finally, the Count opens his eyes and addresses the prince. The prince looks at him, his fury barely contained. The Count speaks calmly. "Your Highness, there has been a grave misunderstanding." The prince raises an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding, you say?" The Count quickly elaborates. "Indeed, my son would never dare harbor ill intent towards a member of the esteemed royal family." A sly smile spreads across the prince's face. "Is that so?" The Count nods. "Your Highness is correct." He then looks at Chris. "Chris is innocent." The prince slams his tankard down and erupts in laughter. The utter humiliation on the Count's face is his prize. Later that evening, Chris and Prince Theo sit together enjoying a victory meal. Roasting chicken and ale cover the table. I have to admit, Chris says it was hard not to laugh. The prince takes a large bite of chicken. He looks at Chris with a grin. "That foolish Count. He only cares about his son. Pathetic, isn't it?" Chris just smiles. "Indeed, Your Highness. Utterly pathetic." He lowers his head, hiding his own cunning smile. The prince glances away, looking almost disappointed. "A pity. If we'd pushed a little further, they probably would have wet themselves from fear." He takes another piece of chicken, laughing maniacally. The prince then turns to Chris, his eyes gleaming. "So, tell me how you did it. The warrant. How did you obtain it?" In response, Chris stands up and begins demonstrating his movements. The prince watches, his eyes widening in surprise. As Chris finishes the move, the prince is in awe. "I knew it. My eyes did not deceive me. You truly are incredible." Chris simply replies, "You honor me with your praise." The prince's expression turns serious. "Now, let's get to the real reason I'm here." Chris looks up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "What do you mean?" A confident smile returns to the prince's face. He beckons him closer, the tension rising. "I want you to come with me. To the royal capital. Chris can only stare, muttering, "Your Highness." The prince just grins, pointing to his knight. The knight smiles as well, giving a nod of approval. But Chris feels a sense of dread. This invitation was not something he could easily refuse. He held the prince in high regard. But if he went to the capital now, all his chances of earning merit on the battlefield would vanish. He was caught in a dilemma. What could he possibly do? Damaging his bond with the prince was the last thing he wanted. Chris met the prince's gaze directly. "Your Highness, may I speak freely?" The prince, surprised, simply nodded. "Speak." Without a moment's hesitation, Chris dropped to one knee. Placing a hand over his heart, he thought, what a disgrace. "When I first stepped onto the battlefield," he began, "I had a friend by my side. His name was Dran." At those words, the prince gasped, covering his mouth with his hand. He stood frozen, listening to Chris's tragic tale. He explained how Dran lost his legs, and how he died right there in his arms. To leave this place would be to dishonor that memory. Chris offered a sad smile as he watched the prince wipe away tears. "There's just something in my eye." The prince pushed back his chair, composing himself. "You find Gate A to be a headache, don't you?" Still rubbing his eyes, the prince replied, "Of course I do. Isn't that obvious?" But Chris remained kneeling before him. "Then grant me 3 years," he declared. "For your sake, I will conquer one of the strongholds. Of the Wolf's Lair's 8 gates." The prince's eyes widened. "Is this true all for my sake?" "Of course," Chris vowed. The prince then offered his mug to Chris. He leaned in close, his voice low. "I believe in you." "Thank you, Your Highness." A genuine smile returned to the prince's face. "Is there anything you desire as a reward?" "I wish to gift you something within my power." Chris stated his request simply. The prince's expression instantly soured. He looked completely stunned, his face twisting in displeasure. "Are you serious? Is that truly all you want?" Chris replied. "Yes, that is more than enough." As he left the building, he finally let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Thank God, everything is resolved. But as he walked, his mind began to race. There was so much more he had to do. The memory of that fight resurfaced against those ninja assassins. And those powerful knights. He remembered that day vividly. Their reaction speed, their movements were on an entirely different level. He ran a hand over his neck. What if Gillen hadn't shown up at that exact moment? If he had to face those shadowy figures again in his current state? The image of a blade against his throat flashed through his mind. I would almost certainly die. His steps grew more determined. I need to get stronger, and faster than ever before. A steely resolve filled his eyes. I must obtain the power of a watcher. With this new goal, he headed for his tent. But as he approached, he heard urgent voices from within. All right, this is the plan. If we're going to do it, it has to be tonight. Chris stopped in his tracks, his senses on high alert. Then he heard the shocking words, "We have to kidnap the commander." Another voice shot back, "We're saving him. What do you mean kidnap?" He peeked inside to see them plotting. They spoke in hushed, frantic tones. "We have to keep it quiet. Even with a death sentence, they won't execute him immediately. If we're lucky, he'll just be sent somewhere else." Chris strode into the tent, his face like a thundercloud. "What in the 7 hells are you all plotting?" He saw them huddled together. Doi, Len, and Digo. They jumped, their eyes wide with shock as they stared at their commander. He stepped fully inside. The 4 of them stood in a tense silence. Finally, Chris broke it. "A rescue strategy, is it?" "Were the 3 of you actually going to charge through the Count's entire army?" Len muttered under his breath. "I can't believe such a smart guy would come up with such a stupid idea." At that, Digo immediately pointed a finger at Doi. It was his plan. Len quickly agreed. Doi panicked, clenching his fists. "Don't you dare put all the blame on me. That's a lie, apologize." Len just looked away, completely flustered. And then, Chris began to laugh. Looking at his 3 foolish, loyal men, he couldn't hold it in. They just stared at him, utterly bewildered. Chris clutched his head, a wide smile spreading across his face. "I feel like I just got hit in the head," he chuckled. He thought to himself with a grin. What is this feeling? He lifted his head, a sense of calm washing over him. I don't need to rush this alone. He looked at his allies. That's right, I'm not by myself. With that, Chris pulled Len and Doi into a powerful embrace. Digo just stood there, scratching his head in confusion. "Thanks, brothers," Chris said. "You made me feel better." Len pointed a shaky finger. "Nope," he declared to the others. "He's definitely lost his mind." Later that evening, Chris grinned at them. "Yes, everything is fine. So let's have a drink. It's on me." A loud cheer erupted from the group. The promise of a free round was all they needed to hear. Soon they were all seated at the inn. Chris held up his mug of ale. They sat around the table, raising their own mugs in return. Ellis sat with them, looking at Chris with concern. "Why were you summoned to court?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. "How did things turn out?" Chris met her gaze. "It was a misunderstanding. Fortunately, I was found not guilty." Ellis beamed with relief.
By the way, I have some good news too, she said, her smile widening. I've finally decided on a weapon. Ellis finally chose the rapier, confident in her decision, while Doi, already deep in his cups, just scoffed at her.
He grumbled that a sword so thin was completely unsuited for her powerful build. She was clearly not having it. Losing himself to drink again, he starts boasting. But Ellis, her eyes blazing with anger, confronts him directly. You will not interrupt me ever again. Doi simply smirks, telling her he's never lost a bet in his life.
Chris glanced at Lin, who simply grinned. Fantastic, I'll be the judge. Chris sighed. This was going to be a total mess.
He watched as Lin raised her hand to begin the duel. Doi and Ellis were already chugging down enormous mugs of ale. Lin announced the rules. The first person to collapse on the table loses. Then she raised her own hand, calling for more drinks. Soon after, with Doi already passed out on the table, Chris watched the conclusion. Lin pointed a triumphant finger at Ellis, who was still standing tall. We have a winner, she declared for all to hear.
Ellis simply wiped her chin, saying it was nothing. By afternoon, their real training began. The instructor observed that they were progressing well through the harsh missed training sessions.
The whole group was forced to run laps with a harsh penalty. The last one to finish gets an extra portion of torment. Doi was already lagging, completely exhausted. Ellis just smiled, wondering why he was already on his last legs 3 months later.
Chris and the others were recovering in the bathhouse. He closed his eyes, and a memory from his past resurfaced. He recalled his old master telling him that there were 9 distinct stages of power he had to overcome. 9 stages, the idea shocked him. His teacher explained that because Wise had existed for so long, people had managed to uncover many of its secrets. To Chris, it all started to make sense. As they sat, his teacher looked at him intently. Did Chris truly understand that the path of practice was not a single road? Chris confirmed that he knew the basic method as well as 2 others that emerged from the descendants.
He pictured it all as a towering structure with levels from 1 to 9. Among them, the Tower 9 method
was the very first to be systematically studied, allowing scientists to classify users into stages. His master held up one finger.
He explained that a child mastering stage 1 could rival the strength of an adult. But for Chris, even that was impossible.
Chris shot up in disbelief, demanding to know why. Was it because he was left-handed? Worry flooded his mind.
His master's words cut deep. You're too old to begin learning Wise. But then he corrected himself. No, forget your age. He explained that 1 needed a special body structure to even begin. With a jolt, Chris snapped back to the present. He remembered the core lesson. The key was to accumulate the mana that filled the very air around him. Staring at his own hand, he focused. And then he saw it, a faint blue wisp of mana flickering on his palm. He had to feel the mana inside his own body. A huge grin spread across his face as he clenched his fist. Shouting, I did it! Lin, sitting next to him, jumped in surprise. Did what? She asked, utterly confused. Just then a soldier appeared. The man approached Chris directly. Mr. Chris, you have a visitor from Central Shed. The prince must have sent him, Chris thought. Perfect timing. The messenger bowed low before him. He explained that he nearly lost his life several times on the journey. His name was Million, a messenger from Central Shed. Chris extended his hand. A pleasure. I'm Chris Squire. He cut right to the chase, asking, Where is the book? Million, a bald and anxious man, began scratching his head. Unfortunately, he stammered, about that book. It is forbidden to be taken outside the capital. I could not bring it with me. Chris was stunned by this news. But Million just smiled. That is precisely why I came in person. Chris leaned in, intrigued. What do you mean? The man placed a hand on his heart, explaining he had studied the Tower 9 path for more than 10 years.
Allow me to properly introduce myself, he said. My name is Million, and I am the central chief scientist of Wise's practice methods.
Chris led the scientist into his tent. Million followed, taking in the humble surroundings with a curious gaze.
Chris studied the man with the spectacles, a spark of recognition igniting in his mind. That name. I'm sure I've heard it somewhere.
As Chris turned to him, Million spoke first, expressing his surprise. There aren't many people left who are still interested in the fundamental training methods. Chris chuckled. I believe everything should be built on a strong foundation. A Million's eyes lit up in agreement. Precisely, he said, clasping his hands. To forge a truly great sword, you must begin with the highest quality iron. As Million spoke with passion, the final piece clicked into place for Chris. Wait a minute. A blade will never break if it was forged without a single flaw. Million continued, looking Chris straight in the eye. To train effectively, you must always begin with the fundamentals. Chris gazed at the text, a knowing look on his face. It was a method to learn the very origin of power. A smile crept across his lips, his favorite phrase. Amazing, he murmured, his mind racing. He remembered this person, this book. He recalled how, in his past life, he had held this exact scripture proclaiming he had finally found the basic training method for sage energy. Back then, his master stood beside him, shaking his head. As a much older Chris read the text, shock gave way to despair. Could it really be true? Was it impossible to purge the accumulated impurities from an adult body? This meant he could never learn it. His master confirmed his fears, and in that moment, Chris's world shattered. He broke down crying out in anguish, wondering why he had only discovered this truth so late in life. He was forced to hand over the book. But now he saw the author's name clearly, Basic Method of Energy Training by CO. Chris looked up, a triumphant smile on his face.
Elsewhere, others discussed a recent development. A vacation had been arranged, a convenient excuse since the person was sent by the third prince himself.
There was nothing to be done. The camp's head, clearly annoyed, asked if there were any issues with the medicinal warehouse. Chris reported that there were no problems and no need to worry. Later in the tavern, he approached his teacher. He asked if this method was truly possible. His master, stroking his beard, confirmed that it was. So that's why. The old man thought not only him, but those three as well. They showed almost supernatural recovery.
Chris confirmed it. It's because of the healing poison we all took to comprehend the sage arts. He looked at his mentor intently.
If you grant me permission, he said, I want both myself and Ellis to study under Beso. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the air. I want that too! They turned to see Ellis standing in the doorway. The mentor called her name, his tone a mix of surprise and anger. But Ellis stood firm. I want to stop being weak, she declared. I want to achieve more, to become stronger. A smile touched Chris's lips. The mentor closed his eyes. Very well, he conceded. First, I will arrange a test for you. Chris bowed his head. Understood. Seated in his tent, Chris meditated, surrounded by a swirling sea of blue mana. He focused, drawing more and more of it toward him. He remembered his master's words from his past life. Holding up 2 fingers, the man had explained, sensing mana doesn't mean you can use it. You must master it through 2 stages, 1 print, 2 open. His master's voice echoed in his memory. To create a seal, you must first control the mana around you. You must learn to weave the threads of raw energy. Once you can draw a perfect circle of mana, or merge scattered wisps into one, you are ready. His master had clenched his fist. Then, with a finger, he drew a seal in the air, 3 lines within a circle. When you succeed, he'd said, a sign of the energy training method will manifest on your body. That will be your seal. Chris focused, trying to replicate the feat. He brought 2 fingers together, pouring his will into the space between them. A low hum filled the air, and then the mana shattered. Chris let out a nervous laugh. I knew it wouldn't be that easy. 4 weeks later, under the bright sun, a sweating Lin stood with Deo. Both watched Chris, who had been training for a very long time. Deo sighed. It's been almost a month. Just then, Doki approached them. Lin glanced over, a worried look on her face. Can he even feel mana yet? She wondered aloud. Chris asked me to let him know if I could. Deo looked down at his own hand. No, not yet. Doki stared in surprise. Lin closed her eyes and mumbled, What even is mana? Can you eat it?
Far away, a count held a piece of canvas to his nose, sniffing it. He lowered the cloth, his eyes locking onto the bloodstains.
A man named Gillen approached. Are you all right, my lord? He asked. What of your son? The count's voice was grim. I heard that he returned from a mission in Hagard. He pressed the cloth into Gillen's hand and closed his eyes. Things are dire, the count thought. The time has come to choose a successor. His mind drifted to his first son. He hesitated, picturing the man smiling as he drank wine, a carefree soul. He then thought of his second son.
After leaving for the royal capital to study, his only passion became painting. The count's gaze fell on Gillen.
And what if he had been with his mother? The young man wondered. The count's voice cut through his thoughts. Gillen. As the young man looked up, the count gave his command. Take the knight's oath of allegiance.
Gillen was stunned. The count's eyes were filled with a desperate need.
I need you. Can you do it? Overwhelmed. Gillen stared at the ailing lord. Yes, he vowed. Sometime later, Gillen stood watch over the count's bed. He announced a visitor. My lord, your father has arrived, having heard of your condition. The first son stormed into the room. He glared at Gillen, his voice dripping with venom. What are you doing here? Get out! As Gillen turned to leave, the count looked away. She reminds him to keep his promise. But just then, a soldier bursts into the room, shouting that they're in grave danger. A wave of shock ripples through the room, as all eyes lock onto the frantic soldier. Later that afternoon, Chris is deep in his mana training. With a flick of his finger, a perfect circle of pure mana materializes before him. He thinks to himself, I've finally mastered the circle. But a new challenge looms. The next step, the seal. He recalls his master's words, describing the 2 primary forms, the lock and the arrow. The master explained that during the imprinting stage, different drawings grant different abilities. The advantage of the 9-tower method is its unmatched stability. But the shooting method is faster, allowing for a quicker grasp of wisdom. Chris looks at his master and asks a shocking question. Is it possible to combine both methods? His master is stunned by the very idea. Pushing up his glasses, he says, Combine them? I've never heard of such a thing. Not once in my entire life.
Undeterred, Chris removes his shoes. He recalls his past life, remembering how he discovered countless techniques. That all stemmed from the basic energy training method. It proved there was so much about power that remained unknown. Chris attempts the impossible, connecting his fingers while channeling his mana. Breathing heavily, he knows the risk is immense. No one has ever succeeded at this before. But then a thought steals his resolve. Without risk, there can be no reward. He pulls back, gazing at his bare feet, determined to try combining the two drawings. Even if he fails, the attempt itself will not be in vain. He focuses, trying to stamp the seal directly onto his leg. Searing heat erupts from the point of contact. A lock seal appears on his skin as his body burns rapidly, draining his mana. Just then, a system notification flashes behind him. Wisdom proficiency has reached level 10. Chris is overjoyed. Clenching his fist, he shouts, "I did it!" He rushes outside to tell everyone his amazing news. His teacher listens astonished. He looks at Chris and notices a powerful new aura has appeared, cloaking his entire body. It was pure, potent energy, just like the aura of other experienced wielders. Suddenly, they hear hoofbeats. A horse gallops toward them at full speed. Chris turns in surprise as his mentor squints, wondering what a soldier is doing here. "It must be a messenger," Chris says. The rider skids to a halt right in front of his horse rearing. He shouts to Chris's master, "An order has been issued. All troops are to assemble immediately." The soldier continues, his voice grim. "The enemy has breached the gate. This is war." He then gallops away. Chris and his mentor stand in stunned silence, trying to process the catastrophic news. Just then, Ellis approaches. Chris snaps into action. "I understand. I'll return to my squad at once. I must depart immediately." The soldier shouts his assent and vanishes just as Ellis reaches them. "Take me with you," she demands. Her mentor glares, clearly disapproving. Chris closes his eyes for a moment. "I respect your fighting spirit," he says, "but I cannot appoint you to a formation now." Ellis grits her teeth, her pride wounded. As he turns to leave, Chris points to a box. "That contains herbs for cleansing the body. Use them once a day while you're here." And with a simple, "I'm off," he's gone. His mentor watches him run and shouts, "Good luck in battle!" As Chris sprints, his mind races. The invasion. It's happening far sooner than he expected. Everything is going wrong. He dashes through the city and discreetly flips a copper coin to a beggar on the street. The man catches it, glances down, and it notices the edge of the coin has been intentionally clipped. A signal. The beggar immediately gets up and runs. An emergency situation. The entire train must prepare to depart. Later, Chris and Dima emerge clad in their battle uniforms, surrounded by other soldiers marching to war. "Demo, what's the situation?" Chris asks. As Demo turns to answer, Lin speaks up, his face grave. "We've been invaded. The enemy is advancing much faster than anticipated." Chris immediately knows why. A bag of powder and a horse. "I knew it," he thinks. To move that quickly, they must have used those two items. He calls a small creature named Pumpkin to him and attaches a tag. There was no time to waste. "Do you remember the tent where we found you?" he asks. "You need to get this there, now." Chris then hears that the battle has already been joined. Lin looks at him, his expression dire. "Yes, and because of him, the situation has deteriorated. 3 of our rows have already been completely wiped out. 100 men led by a knight on horseback cut down 2 men and their steeds in a single fluid motion. 2 of their most skilled fighters charged the front line, only to be erased by 1 attack from an 8-gate knight. The victorious soldier enters the command tent, hailed as a hero. This man is a hardened veteran, a deep scar marking his face. He approaches a table set for 3 commanders. They report that the first 3 enemy units have been annihilated. Across from him, a man with a dark beard applauds slowly. "Just as we expected," he declares. "We have high hopes for you, our finest knight." The scarred man's gaze is steady. "I am ready to begin the operation." His gaze falls upon the map, his green eyes sharp beneath long gray hair. He points. "This area, where the Agraf holds power, is an unshakable fortress. But the surrounding territories are vulnerable. We strike there. Attack every village, gather the refugees, and force them to the fortress." His eye narrows. "And burn everything else to the ground." This ruthless strategy had a name: Operation Rampant Slaughter. Elsewhere, Chris and his fellow soldiers stood in formation. They were part of a massive force, an army of thousands assembled before a towering wall. This was the infamous Iron Wall, a fortress so immense it seemed to pierce the sky. Hideyoshi stared, her expression one of pure shock. Chris watched her, then the wall. Is she really all right? He wondered, his own thoughts in turmoil. He still couldn't process it. How could anyone shatter the legendary majestic fortress wall into so many pieces? But things were different now. This time he vowed they would unleash their true fury. At that moment, a soldier bellowed. "All troops assemble, the parade begins." The Count himself appeared on the platform, clad in full battle armor. Chris was stunned. Well, well. He thought, his eyes fixed on the imposing figure. He gazed at the majestic Count, wondering what kind of battlefield he was marching toward to meet his end. The Count's voice boomed across the field.
Before you stands the fortress wall that has guaranteed our peace for 3 generations. He paced the stage. And now this impregnable bastion, which has never once fallen, is threatened by the minions of the 8 Gate. His expression hardened. I will not waste time with long speeches. A fiery rage ignited in his eyes. With a deadly serious face, he roared, Let's grind our enemies into dust! With that, enemy cavalry descended upon a nearby village.
The village is in sight, they yelled. Excellent! Burn it all down! The soldiers swarmed into the settlement.
They moved through the empty streets confident of an easy victory. This will be over soon. One thought. Then a soldier rushed to his general. He saluted sharply. Sir, we have a serious problem. He pointed toward the center of the village. The well has been destroyed. It's been completely filled with earth. The commanders peered into the ruined pit. The general clenched a pouch in his fist. Without a water source, their powdered rations were useless. If they had drinking water, the food problem would be solved, allowing them to advance at speed without a supply line. More soldiers arrived. Sir, we've searched everywhere. There are no people and no food. The general's rage boiled over. He stomped his foot, shouting at his men, Leave this place. Move to the next village now. His soldiers obeyed, riding hard to the next settlement. But as they approached, they saw another detachment of their own army. Another large force was already riding toward them. Why are they coming from that direction? No, it can't be. The 2 generals met their faces grim. The villages in this sector are also completely empty. Anger turned to cold dread. The lead general stared at the horizon. The enemy knows our plan. But that's impossible. Even so, how could these people abandon their homes so easily? A messenger then arrived. Sir, we've made contact with the main forces. They report only 2 wells remain untouched in the entire region. There was no other choice. They had to seize those locations. That evening, Deo was helping to create a magical seal. The mana is starting to manifest, someone warned. We don't have much time. Deo wiped his brow. It's getting hot. Chris simply said, endure it. Suddenly, a system notification appeared behind Chris's back. He rose to his feet while the others sat deep in concentration. While they worked on the seal, he gave them another order. Now, if you can practice manipulating your mana. This is harder than I thought, Lynn muttered, struggling. Just then, Chris saw Pumpkin dash out from the bushes. A figure in a dark hood followed. The job you assigned us is done, the figure reported. But to convince the last of the villagers, we had to spend every piece of gold we earned from the clean dream. Chris just waved a hand. It's nothing. Money comes and goes. The hooded man continued. As you ordered, we left 2 wells untouched. A sly smile spread across Chris's face. Excellent. Now the enemy will gather right where we want them. He mused, his plan falling perfectly into place. With his preparations complete, it was time to make his move. He strode directly toward the command tent. Brushing past the guard, Chris announced he had urgent business with the Count himself. Inside, the Count seethed. The sheer audacity of a mere knight disciple, yet he granted the man entry. Chris stepped inside, his eyes falling upon the Earl, flanked by his knights commanders, and his own son. Dropping to one knee, Chris offered his greeting. The Count stared down at him, demanding he speak his mind. Chris met his gaze and made a bold proposition grant him personal command of 100 cavalry, and he would personally annihilate the enemy scouting parties. The Count's son instantly erupted in fury. Insolence, you overstep all bounds, he roared. How dare a common soldier make such a demand? But one of the senior knights placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent command not to interfere. The young lord clenched his jaw and fell silent. The Count's eyes narrowed. Your confidence is impressive, he stated coldly. But if you fail, the price will be your head. Any objections? With his head still bowed, Chris replied, None, my lord. As Chris departed, the son rushed to his father's side. Father, why would you entrust him with so much? The Count's gaze was sharp. With this single act, he has captured the entire army's attention. He's showing them we charge straight into the fray. If he succeeds, it's a magnificent victory. And if he fails, it's a loss we can easily afford. Outside, Chris couldn't contain his excitement. A confident smile spread across his face. I will win, he declared, at any cost. Soon he was riding out with Lind and the soldiers. Chris glanced at Lind with a smile. So, you already know your way around a horse? Lind admitted he was far from an expert. He'd had lessons, but a professional rider he was not. Chris looked ahead, then gave a command for the troops to halt. As Chris dismounted, the soldiers began to mutter amongst themselves. Could this new commander truly be trusted? Whispers and rumors filled the air. Some even pointed out the strange dog that accompanied them. Chris ignored them, walking to the cliff's edge and unfurling a map. Lind surveyed their surroundings, his thoughts racing. A straight path from here would lead directly to the shore. He was certain their enemies would be lying in wait. Chris stroked his chin, lost in thought. If he were the enemy commander, how would he play this? His mind raced through the possibilities, setting traps, dividing his forces, sending out reconnaissance units. Suddenly, Lind gasped. Look, he shouted, pointing down from their vantage point. Below, the enemy army was on the move, just as Chris had predicted, roughly 200 men on red-maned horses. Excellent, Chris murmured. They're moving just as I'd hoped.
Just then, a soldier with a thick beard stepped forward. Does our commander even know the way? He challenged. Hundreds from other squads have already fallen, yet you want us to blindly push forward? Chris sighed internally. This wasn't a squad, it was a group of country bumpkins. The soldier glared at Chris, his distrust obvious. Besides, he continued, I noticed you're not even using a proper military map. What is that scrap of paper in your hands? Chris thought back to creating this very map while gathering herbs with Murdoch's gang. This man had no idea of its true value, a complete guide to every inch of the surrounding terrain. Closing his eyes for a moment, Chris strode past the soldier. That's enough, he said, his voice cold. By my authority, you are my subordinates. And I will not tolerate insubordination. But another soldier stepped in to de-escalate, telling the man to stand down.
He insisted the commander must have his reasons. So Chris thought there are at least a few decent men in this unit.
Lind smiled at him.
Looks like being a commander is harder than it looks, he teased.
Chris just smirked back. Every situation has its advantages. As he stepped forward, the very ground beneath him seemed to shift. Dust swirled around his feet.
What is this? He wondered.
As he stared ahead, a system message materialized before his eyes. A notification popped into his vision. Wise proficiency level has reached 21. A jolt went through him. Something had fundamentally changed. A faint blue aura shimmered around his hands. He could hear and see with unbelievable clarity. He clenched his fist, feeling the crackling blue energy.
What is this power? He whispered. This new discovery?
Deeper in the canyon, Chris suddenly halted his group. He turned to his warriors and gave a sharp command. All troops prepare for battle, now! One of the warriors looked around confused.
Here, sir, but how could you possibly know?
Chris shot him a glare that silenced all questions. You will cover our rear. If there's trouble, you advance on my signal. He turned to Lind. You know the strategy. Act accordingly. Lind nodded grimly. Understood. With that, Chris spurred his horse forward with Dogo and Doi right behind him. He was certain of Chris's plan, confident that everything would fall into place. But what if the rear was completely unguarded? Chris charged ahead, his voice cutting through the doubt. If the enemy has scouted this area, it's almost certain. They'll use a diversion, leaving only one path to escape. If their rear is empty, our forces will push straight to the front line. For now, we must trust our comrades. Deo glanced at Chris, who met his gaze with unwavering resolve. The most vital thing right now is our conviction that we will win. Doi looked at Chris, puzzled by his absolute certainty. Honestly, Chris admitted, I was a little lost too. After that training with Tequila? They both remembered the grueling sessions. Yes, Deo agreed, a hint of concern in his voice. But is something wrong? Don't you worry, Chris declared, his promise echoing like a vow. From atop his horse, he roared, We will not die here. The scene shifts to the enemy encampment. A soldier sits on a stump, grumbling. No matter how many times I eat this meat powder, I can never get used to the taste. His friend shot back, Just be glad we have anything to eat at all. Suddenly, the nearby horses began to panic, whinnying in terror. The warrior looked up, annoyed. What's wrong with these mares now? He complained. They may be faster than normal horses, but they're a massive pain to handle. In that moment, the soldier noticed something strange. A bizarre gourd-like creature was approaching the horses, breathing fire and driving them mad. What in the world is that thing? The soldier scrambled into a tent, shouting for his commander. Startled from his sleep, the commander bolted upright. What is it? Commander! The soldier yelled, breathless. There's a wolf outside, it's making the horses go wild. The commander scoffed. You're telling me you can't handle one mangy wolf? Just go catch it. But sir, the soldier insisted, this wolf, it breathes fire. Puzzled, the commander stepped outside to see for himself. In the center of the camp stood the strange creature, spewing flames in every direction as soldiers scattered in fear. The commander's jaw dropped. It's really breathing fire. What kind of monster is this? Standing beside his stunned superior, a soldier asked, Sir, what should I report to headquarters? Report, the commander snapped, regaining his composure. You're afraid of a dog. Form 2 squads, 10 men each. Follow me. The creature leaped away. An enemy soldier yelled, It's getting away! Don't let it escape! Hunt it down and kill it! The mounted soldiers gave chase through the forest. Suddenly, one of them looked up and froze. What is that? From a high cliff, they saw Chris's entire force. Sentries! We've been baited! This was their only escape route. A soldier grinned with bloodthirsty excitement. Forget the wolf gator, everyone. We'll tear these bastards to shreds. Chris's warriors stared down, their faces grim. Enemy cavalry charged into view. The enemy is here, one of Chris's men shouted. Everyone prepare for battle. A soldier confirmed the grim reality. The enemy army is directly ahead. Meanwhile, Chris, Deo, and Doi moved through the undergrowth. They're here, Chris whispered. Doi assessed their numbers. About 20 of them. The 3 of us can definitely take them. Deo grinned as Chris looked at him. Have a little faith, Chris said, and swing that axe with everything you've got. After all, you have the most powerful arms among us. The enemy cavalry galloped toward the rear of Chris's main army.
The enemy is just ahead, one of them roared with confidence.
Look at these complete fools. This will be over in a flash. But then a terrifying war cry ripped through the air.
The soldier turned. What's all that shouting about? It was Dio swinging his massive axe down upon an enemy rider. The axe cleaved the man's entire torso in two. Another soldier watched in horror, screaming, "He was hit!" Panic erupted. "Where did they come from?" one yelled. Dio became a whirlwind of destruction, cutting down two more riders in a single brutal swing. He carved a path through the enemy knights, leaving bisected bodies in his wake. The enemy captain stared in disbelief. What in the hell is going on? He could only watch as his soldiers were slaughtered one by one. That's when Chris appeared, a storm of blue aura radiating from his spear. He heard the enemy commander curse. "My men, killed by a bunch of worthless grunts." Chris's eyes blazed with cold fury. "That's not a pleasant thing to hear," he said, his voice dangerously calm. In a flash of blue light, Chris surged past the commander. A head went flying as Chris declared, "You have no idea the hell we went through to gain this power." Dio and Doi stood on a road littered with corpses, both of them drenched in blood.
Dio looked back at the carnage. These enemies, they were far too weak. Chris's face smeared with blood offered a sharp smile.
"No," he corrected him. Doi raised his twin axes to the sky, letting out a roar of triumph. "I'm getting stronger." Chris's voice was firm. "We are all getting stronger." Elsewhere, another of Chris's knights took a spear and was thrown from his horse. His comrade clenched his teeth, leveling his own spear in a furious counterattack. The enemy warrior's face filled with fear. Chris's knight drove his spear straight through the enemy's heart. With a final powerful swing, he knocked the dead rider from his saddle. His face a mask of crimson, he scowled, wondering just how many he'd cut down. The battlefield was a canvas of slaughter. Looking out at the carnage, he wondered, were there too many? The warrior scanned the dead-still landscape and then roared into the silence. The warrior scrambled, desperate to break through. He realized this army was full of outcasts, men who had left the family. They were brawlers who had chosen their own path. He thought of Chris and Linda. Was this truly how it would all end, if they were gone? The warrior turned to see two horsemen bearing down on him as a panicked shout rang out. "The enemy changed course. They're advancing from the left." He gritted his teeth, cursing the treacherous terrain. They couldn't hope to match the speed of the cavalry. They were completely and utterly doomed. But then, without warning, an enemy horseman collapsed from his saddle. An arrow had found its mark. It had pierced his head at impossible speed. His comrades stared at their fallen brother, screaming, "Arrow!" Another shaft of death whistled past a soldier's ear. He searched frantically, his face pale with fear.
"Find out where they're shooting from," his comrade yelled. But the soldier saw a lone figure on the ridge and cried, "Help has finally arrived."
Another soldier squinted towards the mountain, asking, "Who is that?" It was Lind, poised on his horse, a silhouette against the sky. The warrior took a closer look. "He's an archer," he breathed. The blood-soaked enemy knights looked up, spotting their new foe.
"He's over there, finish him," they roared. The cavalry charged up the mountain, but Lind was already moving.
He evaded their path with ease. His mind flashed back to his training with Taek-woo. He'd been complaining about not having the high ground. Lind recalled his frustration. Next to Chris, and especially Do-yoon, he felt he had no strengths of his own. Taek-woo had simply glanced at him, then commanded, "Take your bow, follow me." The memory was sharp and clear. An arrow struck its target, perfectly splintering the thick tree trunk. Taek-woo stood behind him, holding an apple. "You see, you have potential," he said with a smile. He took a bite of the apple. "However, something's missing." He looked at the fruit in his hand. "There's no power in your shots." Taek-woo suddenly tossed the apple high into the air. "This is war," he stated, drawing his own bow. "Your targets will not stand still. There will always be surprises. An ambush, a sudden gust of wind, anything." His arm tensed, drawing the string to its limit. "In a situation like that, to seize the moment, you must end it with a single shot." Taek-woo released. The arrow flew like a bolt of lightning. Behind him, Lind could only stare in awe. "Stop wasting time comparing yourself to others." Taek-woo's voice echoed in his memory.
"Whether you can master this power is up to you. If you're afraid, you'd better grab a spear right now."
A deep sense of gratitude filled him. He turned his horse, drawing another arrow from his quiver. "Thank you, Taek-woo, for making me stronger." The enemy cavalrymen stared in horror. "He turned around!" one of them screamed. Lind drew his bowstring taut. "What else am I grateful for?" He remembered Taek-woo's piercing gaze. "The Lind I know isn't a fool," he had said. "A man with eyes like yours has no business with a spear." He released. The arrow tore through the air like a hurricane. "Was it courage you gave me, master?" The shaft slammed into a cavalryman with devastating impact. The two remaining riders stared ahead in abject terror. One screamed at his comrade, "Give me your shield." The other begged, "I need something to defend myself." "Then get in front with the shield," he commanded. But in that same instant, an arrow found the gap in his helmet.
Only one remained cowering behind his shield in fear. A single, terrified eye peeked out from behind the metal. Lin's arrow instantly closed the distance. The last rider fell from his horse, his shield clattering beside him. Lin's gaze was ice. I won't let a single one escape. Far below, Chris's warriors were fighting for their lives. At this rate, one of them yelled, they'll run out of men soon. The man next to him gritted his teeth. Just hold on a little longer. There can't be many of them left. But then a bearded warrior's eyes widened in sheer horror. Mother of God, he whispered, looking at the fresh wave of enemies. Staring at the massive crowd, he asked his comrade, Is this where we die? The warrior looked ahead and felt despair wash over him. This was truly the end. He saw their red banners flooding the field. Then a thunderous voice roared from behind the enemy lines. Out of the way! The bearded warrior whipped around his face a mask of confusion. Why are they coming from there? Because we're taking over, Chris bellowed, charging past the stunned man. We've wiped out their entire rear guard. All that's left is this worthless trash. Riding stolen enemy horses, Chris Dugu and Do-yoon crashed into the enemy lines. We'll tear every last one of them to pieces. Chris's spear plunged through a soldier's throat. Dogu screamed, cleaving a knight clean in two. Do-yoon cut down all who stood in his path. Enemy cavalry fell one by one, picked off by Lin's masterful archery. Galloping forward, Lind roared, declaring he was joining the fray. The bearded soldier stared ahead confused. What was all this commotion? He glanced at Chris's unit, wondering who these newcomers were. Chris turned locking eyes with a narrow-eyed warrior and smiled. I see you managed to survive, he remarked. The warrior sighed heavily. Chris added, You've done well. Suddenly, a horde of cavalrymen charged toward Lind. He yelled to Chris, The enemy changed their formation. They're heading for us. A menacing aura flared from Chris. Silence, he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. Their horses are far too mobile. As the enemy riders closed in on his squad, Chris stood firm. To avoid being surrounded, he bellowed, Form 2 lines! We're breaking through with a direct assault. With this formation, they would pierce the enemy's heart. The narrow-eyed warrior gave Chris a weary look. Another offensive, he asked doubtfully. Chris glanced back at him. What's wrong? The warrior smirked. Nothing, just thought we were done for. We are now being transferred to the main scouting force of the 8th Gate. A soldier, breathless, sprinted toward the commander, stopping in the middle of the barracks. He cried out, My squad has been annihilated. The commander looked up, his face pale with shock. What happened? He demanded. The soldier explained that among the enemy was a warrior whose power was equal to a knight's. From inside the tent, another figure overheard the conversation. A knight-level soldier, what was his approximate strength? The commander pressed. The soldier replied, His skills were far beyond an average knight, and besides, he looked incredibly young. Suddenly, the commander and the soldier spun around. A voice from behind them asked, He looked young. A man with long, tied-back hair and a massive scar on his head emerged from the shadows. He glared intensely at the commander. Don't tell me, he growled. It was a kid with dark blue hair. The scene shifts back to Chris standing before his new fighters, all mounted on their horses. Chris raised his hand. A fighter spoke up. Commander Chris, forgive our earlier rudeness. Chris simply smiled. You passed. This isn't my first time dealing with this. The narrow-eyed soldier stepped forward. Allow us to introduce ourselves. I am Slidey Hannell. Before your arrival, I was the one in charge here. He gestured to the bearded man beside him. This is Sefor. I'm the second in command, Sefor added. Chris nodded. Gather everyone. We have things to discuss. Yes, sir, Slidey shouted. Chris, mounted on his horse, addressed the assembled fighters. This, Chris began presenting a mabe with a fiery red mane, is much faster and stronger than any ordinary horse. He held out his hand, a yellow flower resting on his palm. These beasts are violent by nature, making them nearly impossible to tame, but give them one of these bee flowers and they become perfectly docile. As if to prove his point, Chris mounted the red-maned steed and sped past Pumpkin. A system message appeared. Riding skill has been upgraded. Incredible, he whispered. This will handle the hills perfectly. But Pumpkin, standing before him, turned her head away with a huff. Chris looked at her, a knowing smile on his face. Pumpkin, are you jealous? In response, Pumpkin bared her teeth at the terrified new horse. Chris chuckled, apologizing to her. You know you're still the best, right? No one could replace you. He then added, How about we go on a scouting mission together to make up for it? With Pumpkin trotting happily beside him, Chris studied a map. We should climb this high ground and then turn left. Ahead of them, a wall of enormous bushes blocked their path. My goodness, what a thicket, he muttered. He checked the map again. The village with the untouched well should be just ahead. This has to be the shortest route for our reconnaissance. He pushed his way through the dense foliage and saw at the camp of the 8th Gate. Below, a massive troop of cavalry stood guard. He turned to Pumpkin. We're here. Looking down at them, Chris considered their options.
even though they had wiped out most of the enemy in the last battle. Charging that fortified position head-on now would be suicide. Chris's brow furrowed in thought. We need to strike when they least expect it. He suddenly turned to Pumpkin. We're heading back. That night, under the cover of darkness, a voice called out, Mount your
horses. We're moving out. Lind looked at Chris puzzled. A night raid, are you serious? Chris's expression was grim. Yes, we don't have much time. He then looked up at Slidey, who was mounted and ready, a smirk playing on his lips. Is everything prepared?
Then I'll give you the operation's name. The fighters along with Slidey chanted in a weary but determined voice. Shake them up, Chris grinned. Perfectly in sync. Chris led his team toward a dense wall of bushes.
Sephor stared at it, confused. That's a thicket. We can't possibly ride through there. Chris just swung his spear, carving a path through the brush with a single strike. Sephor, you're thinking too small again. Just watch.
As the tangled vines were cleared away, a small field revealed itself. Chris announced that this was the place. A field of fine medicinal grass, just as Murdoch had reported. Gazing forward, Chris issued his next command. They moved with absolute stealth, muffling the sounds of their horses. Their target was just ahead.
A scout watched the 8th camp from the cover of the bushes. He motioned to Chris, showing him the scene. The night scouting team was active. In the camp, enemy soldiers laughed, lost in their food and drink. Deo's eyes narrowed as he watched. He worried their forces were spread too thin, but Chris calmly disagreed. No, everyone in the squad is performing perfectly. Besides, there's only one invasion route, and I've already sent a reconnaissance team there. The rest of us need to conserve our strength. Chris then spotted a soldier with officer's markings, talking with a young fighter. He noted the uniform. It seems we have a commander here. Chris looked at the smiling Lind. Think you can handle it? Lind's grin widened. You even have to ask. At that moment, an enemy fighter stood before the commander. He asked if it was truly all right to be drinking so carelessly. The commander, finishing his glass, simply scoffed. Relax, we sent out our own scouts. The commander boasted, even if you think victory is close,
it's already in our grasp. In that instant, an arrow sliced through the air. He collapsed, his beer mug falling from his lifeless hand. The soldier spun around in terror, shouting, What in the hell is happening? The enemy stared ahead in shock as Chris's
squad charged down the hill on horseback. One soldier wondered if he was dreaming. Meanwhile, the enemy cavalry squad was on the march. Galloping through a canyon, a soldier called out to the scar-faced commander leading them.
There's fire ahead. 3 of Chris's warriors raced on horseback, torches held high. A lookout screamed, It's them! Enemies riding red-maned horses. The enemy commander's eyes narrowed. He knew that meant a certain unit was nearby. Slay was leading the enemy soldiers on a chase just as planned. He remembered Chris's specific orders. Don't engage them in battle. Your horses are just as fast. They won't be able to catch you. Slay turned back with a confident smile. Beside his 2 comrades, he raised his torch higher. All right then, he said.
Let's give them a real chase. Back at Camp 8, the raid was a success. Flames consumed everything, and the bodies of enemies littered the ground.
Seoro turned on his horse and spotted a survivor trying to flee. The soldier's only thought was to report the attack as soon as possible. But Seoro's chilling glare stopped him. And where do you think you're going? Chris rode up to Seoro and gave his command. I'll go after him. You finish off every last opponent here. Seoro simply replied, Understood. Chris then turned to his companions. Lind Dio, you're with me. We're going to greet their master. Chris's soldiers held, their torches leading the enemy cavalrymen further away from the true battle. The enemy commander scowled, asking, Where are our archers? The soldier replied that they all remained with the main force. Suddenly, a terrible realization struck the enemy commander. They had been led too far. He pulled on his reins, shouting for everyone to stop. He turned, a dreadful feeling rising in his chest. Something is wrong. That freak tricked us just like last time. He's attacking from behind. A soldier asked what was wrong, but another rider reported from the rear. A messenger was approaching from the camp. The commander lowered his head, knowing it was over. The soldier fell to his knees. The main force has been attacked, he cried. The captain cursed, consumed by fury. It's the same damn thing again.
Sweat poured down his face as he fought for composure. If they rushed the army back now, he could be walking right into another trap.
The commander glared at his soldiers, his mind racing. He shouted, We're going to bring the army back.
We're splitting the squad in 2. The first group follows me. The second, keep watch on our surroundings.
At the same time, Lind and Chris were racing forward. Enemy ahead, Lind shouted, drawing his bow and firing. Chris smiled and yelled, Let's give them a proper hello. But the enemy commander swung his sword fiercely, shattering the arrow in midair. Chris's expression turned serious. He deflected it, Lind said in disbelief. Chris replied, Of course, he's from the Elite Almond Army. The enemy commander laughed madly from his horse. Arrows like that won't work on me. But suddenly, another arrow struck his soldier's horse. The enemy commander leaped from the falling animal and shouted,
Everyone get off your horses. Seeing this, Chris jumped down from his own horse. We're dismounting too.
Chris charged furiously toward the commander. The officer bellowed to his men, "Don't touch the blue-haired one, I'll finish this freak myself."
At last, the two leaders met face to face. Chris looked at the man's enraged expression, then asked a simple question.
"Do I know you?" A frightening, vengeful smile spread across the enemy commander's face, his eyes burning with a crimson hatred.
Before us stands a warrior, his body drenched in blood. The wall behind him shattered. Chris looks at the fallen foe, remarking that they were surprisingly tough.
Covered in crimson himself, Chris cracks a grim smile. It was a brutal 4-against-1 fight after all. He glances at his own blood-soaked comrades. But there's no doubt in his mind now. They've all grown immensely stronger. They're on a completely different level than before. A new assignment awaits the main intelligence unit of the Cirque forces. A fist slams down on a table with a resounding crack. A commander, his face thin and severe with a sharp mustache, seethes with rage. He silently fumes over the incompetence of his men. All his work, all his struggles to climb the ranks. And for what? To lead an intelligence unit that reports nothing but continuous humiliating losses. Achievements. A laughable dream.
Gritting his teeth, the commander knows that one more failure, one more disgrace, and he'll be demoted to the scrap heap.
Suddenly, a soldier bursts into the tent shouting, "A herd of horses, sir! Straight ahead!" The commander's heart leaps into his throat. "What is it?" he demands. The soldier eyes wide with awe points and yells, "They all have red manes, sir." The commander curses under his breath the 8th gate. Squinting into the distance, he roars an order, "Get the archers into position now!"
All other units prepare for battle. He can't believe they've pushed this far into their territory.
The soldier responds with a sharp "sir," but then he approaches the commander again. "I believe you can stand down, sir," he says calmly. The commander glares at him, utterly bewildered. "What are you talking about?" He squints again, trying to see through the dust. The soldier looking at the red-maned steeds clarifies.
"That's our flag." Chris kneels before the commander. "We've annihilated the enemy's cavalry," he reports. "A force of 200 strong. We've claimed their horses, and we've also crushed their main reconnaissance unit."
"Stationed near the village sector." The commander stares, his mind reeling. He heard Chris's squad was only 100 riders. He looks down at the young warrior and asks, "How did you do it?"
A faint smile plays on Chris's lips. "Instead of asking how, sir, I suggest you provide me with 300 of your most agile cavalrymen."
The commander's brow furrows. A risky gamble. But at this point, he has no other choice but to trust this monster. Riding at the head of his new small army, Chris moves through the forest. This should be enough, he thinks. His men roar, raising their weapons in a furious salute.
"Halt," Chris commands. "We rest here, eat your fill, and get some sleep. Tonight we recover." Lind approaches him asking, "What's our next move?" Chris replies with a cold certainty, "We do what we do best."
His eyes pierce the darkness ahead. "We strike them from the rear." The scene shifts to the enemy commander's tent. One of them is shouting in frustration. "Even our main recon unit has been wiped out. What are we supposed to do now?" A white-haired commander crosses his arms, his expression grim. "What is happening?" he mutters to himself. He stares into the distance, a chilling memory surfacing. This isn't just bad luck.
Every plan they make foiled. It's just like the days of the White Demon. The commander grits his teeth, his blood running cold.
It's that same kind of monster. He glares forward, his brow creased in fury. Who in the hell is he? The grizzled commander declares, "We can't afford to hesitate any longer. We prepare for a direct full-scale offensive." He looks to a man in a bronze armor. "Sir Renin, you will lead the forward squad." Renin bows his head with a frown. "I obey." He then turns to a warrior with a thick beard and wild curly hair. "General Aylin, the central troops are yours." "Understood," the general replies. This man commands a legion 3,000 strong.
Finally, the grizzled commander looks ahead. "And last, Sir Bonad." He turns his gaze to a knight encased head to toe in jet black armor.
"The rear army is your responsibility." The Dark Knight simply replies, "Understood." As the commanders exit the tent, the grizzled captain pulls Sir Bonad aside. "Listen closely." He pauses, his voice low and serious. "There's a strong possibility that a guerrilla force will strike our rear." The captain closes his eyes. "It will likely be the same ones who crushed our reconnaissance. They'll be using the very horses they stole from us." His brow furrows with a grim certainty. "It may be just a hunch, but I feel we must destroy their leader this time no matter the cost." We cut to Chris sharing a drink with his comrades, completely unaware of the enemy commander's final order to Bonad. "Capture that creature at all costs." The scene shifts to a general's office. A count's eldest son stands beside him, delivering his report. Chris's mobile unit has completely destroyed the enemy's main intelligence force. The general is stunned. Can this be true? Did he really accomplish such a feat? Have I truly underestimated that kid? The general glances at the count's son. He thinks to himself, Chris is more than just a soldier. He's a brilliant weapon. A warrior like that is one I absolutely cannot afford to lose. The general rose his hand, tapping the table with finality. Enough contemplation. This was a battlefield. It was time for action. He turned to the Count's son adjusting his armor. From this moment forward, he declared, "I am handing command over to you." The Count's son simply replied, "I understand." With that, the general's voice boomed across the camp.
All members of the Ludwig Knight Squad assemble. Standing before his cavalry, he raised a pike high. The time has come to show them our true might.
A wall of soldiers armed with spears marched forward. Lind gazed ahead, his eyes glinting like steel. "It seems both sides have finally gathered all their strength," he said. "The final confrontation is about to begin."
Chris glanced at Lind, a confident smirk on his face. "Let's go. Our army is more than enough." A lone soldier surged ahead, his war cry, piercing the air.
But in an instant, an enemy spear pierced his chest. Blood sprayed from his mouth as the enemy warrior roared, "Die!" He slammed the dying man to the ground, pinning him underfoot as he raised his spear for the final blow. The soldier's comrades stared in horror. One of them screamed, "This is a completely different level. They've sent their elite troops." His friend glared back, fury in his eyes. "Stop spouting nonsense. Get a grip and fight." The enemy soldier laughed, a cruel mocking sound. "Look at them," he sneered, trembling in fear.
The pitiful mutts finally understand where they belong. But suddenly shouts erupted from behind him, and he turned puzzled.
It was Doi. In a single fluid swing, he sent the enemy's head flying.
From horseback, Chris pointed his spear forward and yelled, "The enemy is defenseless, charge!"
He led his squad in a devastating charge, cutting down enemies one by one. From a distance, Lind drew his bowstring and let an arrow fly. Chris frowned, his mind racing. Good, keep the pressure on, then break their lines. But elsewhere, terror filled a soldier's eyes as an enemy closed in. A spear plunged through his neck, sending him and his horse crashing to the ground.
Slayeye witnessed the carnage and screamed at the top of his lungs, "Chris!" Chris turned confused by the panic in his voice. Sly shrieked, "The enemy is in our rear!" Chris looked back, his blood running cold. An enemy cavalry was tearing through his men.
"We're surrounded!" someone cried out in despair. A spear found its mark, piercing one of Chris's knights through the throat. As the man tumbled from his horse, Lind looked back in shock. Those same bastards! How did they know to attack from behind? Chris gritted his teeth, the bitter reality crashing down on him. "This is my mistake. I was too arrogant. I should have considered every possibility." He watched another of his men fall, the weight of his command crushing him. He knew there would be casualties. But to see dozens of soldiers die right in front of him because of his one order, it was a burden heavier than any armor. Lind saw the rage burning in Chris's eyes. Then Chris roared, "Doi, clear a path on the left! We're breaking out of here!" Doi grinned fiercely. "With pleasure?" Together, they crashed into the enemy horde, a whirlwind of steel and fury sparing no one.
"We will break through," Doi bellowed.
Chris scanned the chaos around him, then gave a new command. "All soldiers fall back." Just then, a new commander appeared before them. Benad. "The enemy is fleeing," he shouted. "Catch them immediately." Chris studied him. That moon emblem on his helmet? He's from the Despair family. Turning to Lind, Chris said calmly, "We're moving on to the second strategy." Lind looked at him completely baffled. "The second strategy? I've never heard of it," Lind said with a frown. "Don't sweat it," Chris replied, his gaze locked forward with grim determination. "By any means necessary, I will lead us to victory."
Lind saw a completely different man in his commander's eyes. The main allied squad rushed toward the enemy.
A general in bronze armor roared, "All troops, we are launching an all-out assault." He and his cavalry slammed into the enemy lines, shattering their formation. From the opposing side, Alan sneered, "I see the half-dead old man has finally lost his temper." The general just smiled from his horse and shouted back, "Coming from you, that's rich. You don't look so young yourself." A messenger galloped to the Count's eldest son. "Sir, the enemy squad that ambushed Chris's troops from the rear is chasing them. Send help."
The Count's son froze, fear gripping him.
"What do I do? Even father is on the battlefield. That bastard Chris. What a circus he's created." His commanders approached with grave news. "Sir, Chris's cavalry is deep inside the enemy camp. Our main unit has gathered all its forces to defend this position. We have no soldiers we can pull away from here." The Count's son snapped back, "I'm aware of that."
Panic twisted his face as he screamed his decision. "We will not send a rescue team. Let them face the consequences alone."
"Soldiers to the vanguard." The soldier roared, "I obey the commander-in-chief, son of the Count." The Count's son thought to himself, "Chris dug this grave himself. If he dies, it's his own fault. If he survives, it won't be too late to deal with him then." With that, Chris and Lind surged forward. Benad and his cavalry thundered after them. A soldier cried out, "They're leaving the battlefield." But Benad roared an order, 100 elite soldiers follow me. The rest of you return and aid our allies." A wicked smile spread across his face as he yelled, "I won't let that cheeky lamb escape."
Chris and his squad raced down the ravine with Benad's elite unit hot on their heels. Suddenly, a narrow clearing appeared before them.
Lynn's eyes widened. "We're here! This is it!" Chris spun around, his voice ringing out, "Everyone drop them now!"
On his command, they unleashed the black spheres in their hands. Instantly, a thick cloud of smoke erupted right in front of
Bernard's charging elite squad. As Bernard pushed through it, he yelled, "What is this fog?" on the other side. Chris stood firm. He shouted to his comrades, "Leave quickly before the fog envelops you. From now on, my second in command, Lind, is in charge." Lind, astride his horse, turned to Chris, his voice filled with urgency. "Commander, be careful."
Inside the smoke, it was pitch darkness. A warrior cried out, "Where am I?" Another screamed, "I can't see anything." Bernard gritted his teeth and leapt from his horse. "The horses are panicking. They're useless in here." He roared, "Dismount now!" His soldiers scrambled, pressing back to back as Bernard shouted, "Everyone gather around me. Form a defensive circle. Do not attack recklessly."
He reasoned, "The enemy can't see us either." But as Chris peered into the gloom, he wondered if that was truly the case. Could he really not see what was happening? He lowered his head. However, thanks to the heightened senses he'd gained from mastering Wise and the ability to sense killing intent that Tekel had taught him, Chris looked up. He could see the faint glow of the soldiers' auras. "I can feel their every move." Lind Doi and the others stood before the wall of black fog. Seoro rode up to them. "Are we really leaving the commander in there alone? Shouldn't we go back and rescue him?" Lind looked down, his heart heavy as a memory of Chris's training surfaced. He remembered Tekel saying, "Of course everyone learns differently. Each person has their own path. And their own predispositions." Lind had listened carefully as Tekel continued. "But Chris, he is a little different. To be honest, his persistence is almost frightening." He recalled Chris striking the training dummy again, and again, and again. Tekel's voice echoed in his mind. However, it's that insatiable hunger that allows him to grow at an incredible rate. It's unpleasant to admit, but I feel like that 15-year-old boy is already on par with me.
No, he may have already surpassed me. Tekel had then looked at Lind with a knowing smile, asking, "What's with that look?"
"Are you envious?" Lind had simply smiled. "Not at all." Back in the present, Lind gazed toward the fog.
Where else would we find a commander as stalwart as him? His brow furrowed with determination as he said,
"I believe in him. Chris can handle this." Inside the smoke, the enemy soldiers stared blindly into the abyss. One of them took a single step, and a fountain of blood erupted from his throat. His comrades looked around in a panic. "He's dead from the side," one of them screamed. "The enemy is in here with us." Another soldier froze in pure terror, when a calm voice echoed through the darkness. "It's very dark, isn't it? This place is called the Well of Mists. There are hills on both sides. Once you're stuck in this fog, it's not so easy to escape. That's why I'm being kind enough to warn you." A soldier gritted his teeth. "What the hell is this rat talking about?" In that same moment, blood sprayed from the man beside him. He spun around screaming, "He's right here, next to me."
"No, to the right," another yelled. "Calm down." But in that instant of chaos, Chris claimed another head.
"He's here," a soldier shrieked. Then, silence. A lone soldier was left, his spear trembling in his hands. Where is everyone?" he stammered. A voice whispered right beside his ear. "You should thank them. I had a lot of fun. But this is far from over." The soldier stood paralyzed by terror. Chris's voice continued. "From this point on, you will know only one feeling." He materialized behind the soldier, whispering a single word into his soul. "Fear." The soldier whipped around in terror, but saw nothing. He stood completely still, thinking, "Besides the screams, I can hear nothing. At this rate, I'm going to die." He took a small, hesitant step forward. "I have to get out of here right now. I can't just die here." Suddenly, his foot caught on something, sending him crashing hard to the ground. Lying on the dirt, he looked around frantically. He had tripped over something. He saw what it was. The screaming had stopped. He fumbled for a fallen soldier's helm, then whispered, "It couldn't be." She shot up her face, a mask of disbelief. She screamed that everyone was gone. They were all dead. In that same instant, Chris's spear point found its home in an enemy's throat. Chris, his brow heavy with killing intent, leveled his spear, his gaze locking onto the terrified soldier. "Looks like I hit the mark," he stated coldly. "You're the last one on this path." Nearby, Bonet bellowed at his own men. "No one moves, control yourselves. The enemy is just trying to sow chaos and panic." But then a sword sliced through the air. It was Banat, who had pinpointed Chris's location in the haze. Chris leaped back, dodging the fatal blow. The enemy knight glanced at his general. "Sir, that knight just now." Banat snapped back. "Shut your mouth. Otherwise, I'll never track that freak down." Chris stared at Banati, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. So this was a knight. Dealing with him wouldn't be so simple. Chris stood in the quiet, his eyes fixed forward. Banat sneered. "That's the end of your little tricks." "You rat." But Chris knew better. He still had plenty of aces left to play. He sent a dagger spinning through the air. What was he planning? An enemy soldier near Bonat cried out in agony, the dagger embedding itself deep in his shoulder. Another soldier behind the knight yelled, "He's throwing daggers at us!" Bonat gritted his teeth, his face twisting with rage. "That cowardly bastard!" he roared. He thought he'd hidden his presence completely. His back still turned to his men. Bonat commanded, "We're pulling back! Get out of this smokescreen." One of the knights standing behind him asked, "Sir, where do we go?" Meanwhile, the smoke in the gorge swirled thicker, a living entity. A soldier stumbled out of it, screaming, "It's the devil!" In the next moment, an arrow pierced his skull and he collapsed. Lind glared at his men. "Kill anyone who runs from that smoke," he ordered. Doi stood with him near the exit of the fog, his weapon at the ready.
Doi's eyes were locked on the smokescreen when Bonat's head suddenly emerged from the white veil. Gazing into the mist, Doi muttered,
"Someone's coming." Deo, his expression grim, held up a hand. "Wait," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous.
Chris walked out of the smoke. Deo's face broke into a grin. "It's the commander." He stood beside Bonet's severed head.
"Thank the gods you're safe, sir." "Is there anyone left inside?" Chris answered coolly. "Not really, just a couple of flies buzzing around." Doi turned to him. "Wait here, sir. I'll take care of them completely." But Chris turned away. "There's no need, let them be. It's better for us this way." His voice echoed near the smoke.
"Right now we need to get our gear in order and return to the front lines, as quickly as possible." Lind, now on horseback, rode up.
"And here is our commander himself," he declared. "Everyone is drained from that long fight. A few days of rest would do us all good."
Chris glanced at Lind's smiling face and nodded. "An excellent suggestion."
Evening fell. Lind and Doi stood together staring up at the darkening sky. "I was in complete shock back in that gorge," Lind admitted. As the curtain of smoke finally lifted, it revealed mountains of enemy corpses. Lind stared at the sight. He really made a mess in there. He clenched his fist. A new resolve burned within him. Chris had taught him so much. He knew he could become that strong too. Doi smiled, watching Lind's determined expression. "Looks like you're not the only one whose blood is boiling," he remarked. We flash forward 2 days later. Lind, holding a letter, approaches Chris. "Sir, a message from the reconnaissance squad." Lind unrolled the parchment and began to read aloud. It says Count Van Ludwig's night squad breached the enemy camp. Chris's face remained impassive. "What were our losses?" Lind's expression tightened. "Half the squad was annihilated, sir. But the enemy suffered considerable losses as well." Chris mused to himself. The Count's forces wouldn't break that easily after all. Lind looked at Chris, a hint of awe in his voice. "Sir, you've earned a new nickname? That enemy commander you killed? He was a famed knight from the notorious Family of Despair. It seems the survivors started a rumor about you," Lind continued. "They're calling you the Black Smoke Devil." Miles away, an enemy commander with white hair read the report, his brow furrowed. "The Black Smoke Devil," he scoffed. "And even Bernard is dead unbelievable." Just then, a soldier burst into his tent. The commander sighed. He'd bet anything their intelligence unit was also wiped out by this freak. His skills are on par with the knight's.
"To prevent a complete catastrophe, we have to cut his throat, and soon."
The commander turned, pondering his next move. What could be done? But his thoughts were cut short. A soldier shouted from outside. "Commander Van Ludwig's forces are advancing." The commander raised his hand. "All soldiers," he bellowed, his voice ringing with grim determination. "Prepare for battle." He knew he still had enough men, for now. Holding the dispatch patch, Sleethy questioned if sending a letter in this chaos was truly wise. But Chris knew it was a vital move, a crucial piece on the chessboard of war. In his past life, this disaster struck days later, but now, the flames of war were already raging. The future had been twisted. He could not afford to lose his edge for a single moment. Turning to his subordinate, Chris revealed the letter's destination. With a chilling tone, he declared, "It's for the royal palace." Elsewhere, Sephor stood before a commander requesting a detachment. "We need cavalry, sir." The commander's brow furrowed. "For what reason?" Sephor could only reply, "The reason is unknown to me."
"My only order is to gather at David Fortress before sunset."
The commander pressed, "And where is Chris now?"
"His location is unclear, sir," Sephor admitted. "He only proposed we meet in 3 days at Sunset Hide."
The scene shifts to the imposing walls of David Fortress. A sentry on the ramparts cries out in alarm. "A cavalry squad approaches." A soldier named Ralph swore under his breath. "The moment I start my shift, something big always happens." The sentry squinted into the distance. "Wait, they're allies." Ralph turned utterly baffled.
"What other allies could possibly be out there?" A lone rider approached the wall. "I am Chris," he announced, his voice clear. "I've left the battlefield to deliver an urgent message."
Soon after, Chris met a puzzled Ralph face to face. "What are you doing here?" Ralph demanded. "I should be the one asking you that," he said before a grin broke across his face. "But it's good to see you." Ralph explained he'd been sent to Highguard and only recently returned. "By the way," he added, "the rumors about you are insane. They call you the Devil of Black Smoke, claiming you single-handedly wiped out 100 elite fighters. Is that true?"
Chris gave a slight smile. "People tend to exaggerate. But yes, the core of the story is true." His gaze fell to the spear in Ralph's hand.
"And your leg?" Ralph leaned heavily on his weapon. "Took a nasty wound in battle. The healers did what they could. But they said I'll never run like I used to." A shadow crossed Chris's face. "If you need anything," he said seriously, "just ask." He knew that even with his own healing arts, a wound that severe would be a formidable challenge. Ralph just smiled warmly as Chris turned to leave. In that case, buy me a drink when this war is over. Most folks don't believe I fought alongside the great Chris. I'll need proof. Chris laughed, his voice echoing in the stone corridor. You've got a deal. As he ascended the stairs, he recalled his last visit. This fortress. It served as a bastion for soldiers too wounded to return to the front lines. On the walls, Commander Strick turned to face him. Why have you come, Chris? Chris didn't waste a moment. I have an urgent report, Commander. There are enemy troops nearby. Strick's eyes widened. What do you mean? Chris's expression was grim. After striking the enemy's rear guard, I discovered a portion of their forces breaking away from the main battlefield. They're moving this way. Strick was stunned. Here, I thought this region was secure. Chris's mind raced. He had fabricated part of the report. But he knew they would come here regardless. Their goal was clear a decapitation strike bypassing the pawns to aim directly for the king. Suddenly, a scout scrambled up the stairs. Commander Strick! A massive army has appeared before the fortress. Another shout erupted from the walls. Enemy troops spotted. There must be at least 2,000 of them. As Strick stared in horror, a memory flashed in Chris's mind. A man in yellow standing by a wagon. If you hadn't insisted on a night battle, he'd said. Then a vision of Lind holding a beer. If we can just hold out one more day, the entire world could change. Lind had downed his drink. But what difference does it make now? The vision faded. Before them, the enemy army stood in perfect menacing formation. Why are there so many of them here? Strick breathed, his voice trembling. Chris clenched his jaw. They had arrived far faster than he'd predicted. That calculating bastard was still on his way, and Cypher's reinforcements wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. Chris turned to the commander. How many soldiers can we muster right now? Strick's answer was bleak. Counting the archers and the walking wounded, maybe just over 200. He looked out at the sea of enemies, his hope draining away. Even with the 200 cavalrymen Chris had brought, with these numbers, they wouldn't last even half a day. Chris's eyes scanned the enemy ranks, spotting a familiar banner. The image of a wolf. So it was them. Were they all from the Wolf Clan? This could be a small blessing in disguise. The enemy war drums began to pound a slow, violent heartbeat that shook the very stones of the fortress. Strick gritted his teeth in fury. Damn them all! Chris narrowed his eyes. Was this just an intimidation tactic? But then he felt it. Faint but unmistakable. A potent, suffocating wave of killing energy rolling off their lines. To his right, Chris's eyes caught a lone fighter watching him. He turned his head, and the figure vanished like a ghost. That man wasn't a commander, just a common private. The soldier glanced over, and Chris felt a chill. Why was this man unarmed during a high alert? Strick shot Chris a confused look, and in that instant, Chris understood the purpose of the drums. Strick turned to him, asking where he was going. Chris stared straight ahead. A moment later, a soldier leaped from the wall, a dagger aimed straight for him. With a single powerful strike, Chris shattered the man's grip on the weapon. He knew this was the signal. The attack on the fortress had begun from within. A bewildered Commander Strick cried out, demanding to know what was happening. The assassin. Chris had thrown back, stared in shock, but his reflexes were sharp. Chris closed the distance. So you're the one behind all of this, he declared. The assassin leaped backward, a new dagger appearing in his hand. He lunged with blinding speed, but Chris easily ducked beneath the swing. He glared at the killer, then unleashed a devastating blow to his side. The man was sent flying several meters. Strick pointed a trembling finger, roaring for his men to gather. Capture that creature at once, Chris analyzed the assassin, not a hint of hesitation in his movements. This was the work of a professional. The soldiers began to surround the spy. Don't attack recklessly, Strick warned them. This man is dangerous. Chris glanced at his mission objectives. This assassin had to be a hireling of the 8th Gate. He needed information. He turned to the spy. You're from Night Dagger, aren't you? The assassin's eyes widened, his silence a confession. Who are you? He stammered. A cold smirk formed on Chris's face. He knew his guess was right. This is my territory. With a menacing glare, he uttered the command phrase, Follow Amoko's strict rule. The spy clutched his side, his face a mask of terror. Chris watched him carefully. The man's reaction confirmed it. It was the code of absolute subordination binding Night Dagger assassins to their highest-ranking masters. The spy collapsed to his knees. To think a phrase he'd overheard by chance held such power. Seize him now! Strick bellowed, and the soldiers swarmed in, shouting their obedience. They grabbed the unresisting spy. Take him to the underground cells, Chris ordered. There's a lot we need to learn from him. Strick, frowning, agreed it was a good idea. The spy's terrified gaze was locked onto Chris. Later from the castle gate, Chris pointed towards the enemy camp. Standing on the walls, he explained, they won't attack tonight. Strick asked how he could be so sure. The drums were a signal for their assassin, Chris replied. Since their inside man failed to respond,
They're likely rethinking their entire strategy.
he looked at the commander. Which means we can rest for now.
Strick declared they would fight back tomorrow. But Chris, seeing the commander's weary expression, corrected him. Tomorrow we open the gates. We're taking the fight to them. We won't let a single enemy inside. Later, Chris stood before Pumpkin.
Gently explaining this plan. You'll have to stay here tomorrow, but I promise I will come back for you, so don't you worry. Pumpkin rested her head beside him. Chris's mind was already on the battle. His true opponent would appear tomorrow. The knight who broke through Sunset Hide's defenses. The youngest master from the legendary 8th Gate.
Tossing his shirt aside, his eyes blazed with determination.
Perth, he muttered.
The next morning, Chris stepped onto the walls
And found Strick already there. You've been standing here all night, he asked, surprised. Strick stared into the distance with a tired gaze. It's not as if I saw you doing much, he retorted. Chris smirked. They had practically put him in a coffin, but that was hardly surprising. He gazed over the ramparts. Lower the bridge, he commanded.
Strick snapped back nervously.
Are you insane? There are 2,000 of them out there. Chris's expression remained unchanged.
This fortress is finished the moment they breach the walls anyway. But Strick shook his head.
Sunset Hide Fortress. It will never fall. Chris sighed internally. The commander had already lost his ability to think rationally. It was time to shock his system. He stared hard at Strick. You're right. It wouldn't fall if only the
Baron's night squad and larger troops were still here.
Strick flinched as if slapped by the truth. He gritted his teeth. So what are you suggesting, that we surrender? Chris's eyes narrowed. Wrong answer. We go out there and we fight. Open the fortress gates. I will take full responsibility for what happens next.
Strick's brow furrowed in turmoil.
Damn you,
He cursed under his breath. Doi walked ahead of the others, holding their banner high. Lend looked nervous.
Are you sure this will work? He asked Chris. Marching forward, Chris replied calmly. The Wolves family may be weak, but not in spirit.
Unlike those who hide behind wealth and diplomacy, they are not bound by such rules. Linda Nam glanced toward Chris. Chris added that the wolves earned respect for one reason: they held a value they were willing to die for.
With a knowing smile, Chris spoke the word honor. At that moment, an enemy army appeared before them, led by a hardened middle-aged man. This was Alec of the Wolves, their commander-in-chief. He was informed that only 4 enemies stood in his path.
As Chris and his companions stepped forward, Alex scoffed, wondering if these 4 fools intended to surrender.
But Chris slammed his spear into the ground. Facing the entire army, he roared, I am Squire Chris. By order of the commander of Sunset High Fortress, I demand a duel if you can defeat us. We will open the gates and surrender our weapons. Alec's brow furrowed. A mere knight apprentice is demanding a duel. A wide, mocking grin spread across Alec's face. Chris thought to himself, perfect, he took the bait. With a menacing glare, Chris raised his voice again. I, Squire Chris, stake my very reputation on this vow.
Or have the great wolf soldiers already wet their armor at the sight of 4 people? Have you forgotten the meaning of your honor?
The taunt hit its mark. Alec's face twisted with rage, yet he calmed himself. You have a sharp tongue, boy. I will make you regret ever speaking those words. Chris shouted back. Then I'll take your answer as a yes.
As proof of my promise, the fortress gates will remain open. Alec glared, wondering if the boy was a complete idiot.
Had the wind completely blown his mind? A soldier behind Alec urged. Commander, he cannot be trusted. It's a trap. This is our chance. We should invade the fortress with our full strength. Alec whirled around to face the soldier. You brainless simpleton, he snarled. Would you disgrace the honor of the wolves that we have protected with our lives? If you open your mouth again, I will erase your existence. Alec then turned and bellowed to his troops.
Are there any among you willing to tear the throats out of these arrogant pups? A soldier with decorated pauldrons stepped out from the ranks.
He roared, I, Squire Napin, ask for this opportunity. The fighter stomped forward, standing before Chris's party. Cracking his knuckles with a smirk, he announced, I am Squire Naftal, in service to Sir Aaron. But another warrior stepped forward to meet him. With an axe resting on his shoulder, he spoke calmly. My name is Dio of Circa, commander of the Centurions in the Chris Cavalry.
Naftal burst out laughing. A centurion here to fight me? Don't make me laugh, Greenhorn.
He charged, spear-leveled, screaming, If you don't know your place, you will pay for it with your life.
Dio stared ahead then. In a single brutal motion, he sliced clean through Naftal's torso. Next, he said, standing beside the corpse. Alex stared in disbelief. What is that monstrous power? But a commander behind him sneered.
He was simply careless. Another enemy commander with a cruel smile stepped forward. I am the commander of the Fox Century. That useless Naftal. How could he lose so easily? He looked Deo up and down, thinking, those who rely. Only on brute strength always have a weak spot. Fall charged forward sword in hand, but Deo swung his axe to meet him. He effortlessly deflected the attack. Fall stared back with a puzzled expression. A direct attack is useless. Reeling from the impact, he thought, he can't possibly control that kind of immense power perfectly.
There has to be an opening. But as Fall looked up, Deo was staring him straight in the eye, his own brow furrowed. What is that reaction? The next instant, Deo slammed his axe into the commander's elbow. Fall staggered back, blood erupting from his nose.
This is absurd, he sputtered, falling to the ground. Deo glared past him and said, "Next." A bald man stepped forward nervously. "I am the commander of the century." Before he could finish his sentence, his head flew from his shoulders.
Next. One by one, Deo tore through the enemies. Another commander was smashed to the side.
He dashed toward the next challenger. The commander, seeing him approach, stretched out a hand in terror. "Wait!" he shrieked in fright. The scarred warrior just smiled. "You haven't even introduced yourself." "My name is Deo." He stood among the pile of commanders he had defeated and roared to the next one in line. The remaining enemy commanders were speechless. He defeated 5 commanders, all by himself. Chris watched with a satisfied smile. Now their morale is at rock bottom, he thought. Standing beside Lin, Chris shouted to Deo, "Let Lin continue from here." Deo turned back, protesting. "I can still fight." Chris simply smiled. "I know, now go back."
Chris knew they couldn't waste all their energy in this place. A new enemy commander now appeared before Linda. Chris glanced at Linda, then at her sword, noting it was in perfect condition. The stern warrior eyed her opponent.
As she settled into her stance, Chris wondered, was there anyone in this entire army who could actually defeat a member of his squad in a duel? The enemy commander smirked. This new challenger. He looked far weaker than the last. He swung his massive blade, but Lin dodged like a phantom. The commander struck again, a malicious grin on his face.
Lind parried the enemy commander's strike, a mocking smile on his face. "No matter where you go," he laughed, "there's always someone like you."
The commander lunged desperately, but Chris dodged like a phantom, swinging his blade in a graceful arc. Then, with a deadly whisper of steel, he severed the man's head from his shoulders. Lind flicked his sword, sending blood arcing through the air. "One strike is all it takes," he declared. Lind strode forward as the city walls erupted with triumphant shouts of his name. Behind Alec, a new warrior stepped forth. He wore bronze armor with gray hair and 3 jagged scars carving a story across his face. Alec commanded, "Pang, go." "Yes, sir," Pang replied. Stepping onto the field, he brandished a colossal heavy sword. "I am Pang, a wolf knight." The fearsome Chris watched him, realizing something. They were finally bringing out their serious fighters. It was time to answer in kind. Doi stepped forward, an axe slung over his shoulder. "The name's Doi," he said. Pang glared at him. "Your rank?" Doi frowned, annoyed. "A century commander." In a flash, Doi charged. Pang stood his ground, raising his sword. He smirked, thinking, if I control the distance, his axe is completely useless. Pang advanced, locking eyes with Doi. He wondered what if he suddenly backed away. Doi swung his axe in a wild arc, but Pang dodged with ease. "Is that it?" he taunted. "What I'd expect from a puppy who doesn't even know the basics." Doi blocked the counterattack, but the sheer force of the blow sent him stumbling off balance. Pang pressed his attack, shouting, "You still have so much to learn. Did you truly believe you could stop my greatsword with that pathetic axe?" Dio stared in shock while Lin stood nervously beside him. Doi was sent flying several meters, landing hard as Pang loomed over him, grinning with satisfaction. Blood dripped from Doi's face. He snarled, "Order." His eyes burned with the menacing light. "Now!" he roared, blood streaming from his forehead. "I am truly angry." In an instant, he vanished. The battle reignited as Pang blocked a furious onslaught, a manic smile spreading across his face. "Yes, now this is a fight. But you will never get close to me." Doi swung his axe again. Pang parried the attack with his sword. "Such cheap tricks won't work on me." Doi used the momentum, pushing off with explosive force and closing the distance in a heartbeat. Pang's mad smile widened. "Attack me!" he roared, ready to parry with a single hand. Doi's response was unexpected. He let go of his axe. Pang's eyes widened in horror. He let go of his weapon. The man is completely insane. Doi then swung the side of his other axe like a hammer. Pang barely blocked the crushing blow, staggering back as his balance shattered. He thought in disbelief. How did he generate that much power? Doi swung his other axe and grunted, "You make too much noise." In one clean motion, he decapitated the wolf knight. Pang's head hit the dirt. Doi looked to the heavens and let out a victorious roar. Deo watched in awe. "Doi is an absolute monster," he said, deciding not to add anything else. Alec watched the scene with a cold, calm expression. From behind him, a commander yelled, "At this rate, we'll fall for their tricks. We must storm the fortress now." Alec's blade flashed, silencing the dissenter permanently. He gritted his teeth and spat. "We are losing to just 4 insignificant gnats." Alec's gaze swept the field. "Perth, prepare for battle. The soldier wolves are ready," a new voice answered. Stepping forward was Ryan, commander of the Ryan Wolves unit. With long hair and shining bronze armor, he asked, "Shall I go first?" Alec nodded. "Very well. Raiden, you may proceed."
Chris smiled at the blood-soaked Doi. "Excellent work. Go and get that bleeding stopped immediately."
His expression hardened as he turned toward the enemy lines, his hand reaching for the sword sheathed on his back. "Now it's my turn." He strode forward to face the new knight Ryan. Ryan narrowed his eyes, his gaze piercing through the enemy soldiers. He must be here among them, he thought. I would recognize him in a single glance. The prodigy of the 8th Gate, the youngest Wiser, the hero who destroyed Sunset Hyde. Suddenly, Chris's gaze shifted. What had he seen? He looked past Ryan to a man in expensive armor with long hair. Could that be Perth?
Chris locked eyes with the man who stood just behind the enemy commander. He wondered, is Perth looking right at me? The enemy commander smiled, breaking the tense silence. Don't pretend you are not here, Chris.
My name is Ryan of the Wolves. Chris placed a hand to his chest. My apologies for the tactlessness, Sir Ryan, he said. I am Chris Esquire from Circa. Ryan's gaze sharpened. That means you are stronger than the other 3 then. He looked ahead and Chris's face grew grim. I will not disappoint you. Ryan charged forward, raising his shield. Then show me your best, he roared. Ryan swung his sword, creating a shower of sparks as it clashed against Chris's weapon. Chris countered with a threatening spear thrust, but Ryan's shield held firm. Then the commander suddenly lowered his shield and lunged forward. The sword nearly found its mark, but Chris dodged just in time. He thought he attacks while using his shield for a perfect defense. It seems he has vast combat experience. Meeting Ryan's gaze, Chris activated his technique. The spear became a blur. It flew from every direction at once. If that's your strategy, then let's see you parry this. Ryan looked at him, his eyes wide with astonishment. He wondered what kind of technique this was. Ryan threw up a shield, just barely deflecting Chris's attack. Seeing Ryan survive, Chris was impressed. He managed to block his enhanced snake tongue attack. This kid was stronger than he looked. Chris sighed. Had he underestimated his opponent? It was time to change tactics. He would use the dance that Tackwell had taught him. Closing his eyes, Chris settled into a new stance. Now where to begin? His eyes slowly opened. He began to circle the shielded Ryan, a strange rhythm in his steps. What was he doing? A melody formed in his mind, notes playing out a deadly tune. Suddenly, the weight of his spear vanished. Ryan, peering from behind his shield, felt a flicker of recognition. He'd seen this dance-like technique somewhere before.
Chris slammed his spear into the shield with crushing force. Ryan's stance faltered. As the melody in Chris's head played on, the tempo became faster. The power and speed were unbelievable. Chris moved with blinding accuracy, unleashing a storm of blows. A torrent of strikes rained down on the shield. Ryan stared dumbfounded. Was Chris even throwing punches anymore? The rhythm ceased, but the assault continued. The barrage kept hammering Ryan. He couldn't keep up with the tempo. Dodging was impossible. He looked on in sheer terror, finally asking, "What is your connection?" "To the dancing sword." Chris paused, a flicker of interest in his eyes. So he knew of Tickle's dancing sword, the nickname he earned. Back in his 20s, Ryan swung his own sword in desperation, but Chris evaded it effortlessly. I can't believe it, Chris mused. You survived Tackwell's technique even though you aren't a Wiser yourself. You're a lucky man. Chris sidestepped another clumsy blow. One, Chris said calmly. He thrust his spear forward, piercing Ryan's throat. Your luck just ran out. Ryan collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. Chris observed him with a detached curiosity. Alec watched from a distance, his face grim. Even Ryan has fallen, he muttered. At that moment, Perth stepped forward. Mr. Alec, he said, his gaze locked on Chris. Allow me. His brows furrowed with intensity. He looked toward the battlefield, wondering what had finally brought things to this point. Chris struck the ground with his spear. This was it. A true test to see how far his skills had come. He stared menacingly at the approaching figure. As Perth walked forward, Chris realized this was his chance. A chance to defeat a hero of legend. Perth stopped just before him. I have a proposition, he stated. Chris eyed him intrigued. With a deep frown, Perth declared, Let us end this war with a single duel between us. Winner take all, Chris smirked. And who gives you that right? I do, Alec's voice boomed across the field. I, Alec, put my family's honor on the line. I vow that if Perth is defeated, all our soldiers will retreat. Perth smiled, his eyes fixed on Chris. Any problems now? There was no turning back. Chris's face hardened. Perth's voice roared, Then allow me to introduce myself. My name is Perth of the Wolves family. Chris tensed, a knot of nervousness forming in his gut. Perth continued his proclamation. I was raised by the Wolves clan, and at 21, I was named the youngest Night Wiser in history. His brows knitted in determination. Today, I will destroy the enemy before me and be the first to cross Sunset Hill. The enemy soldiers erupted in thunderous cheers for Perth. Chris knew the entire battlefield had just shifted. The atmosphere was electrifying. Not to be outdone, Chris shouted back, I am Chris, Esquire of Circus. He glared at Perth, his voice ringing with power. At the age of 17, I learned the power of a wiser myself. Standing before the legendary hero, he made his own declaration. I am that wiser Chris. I challenge you, Knight Wiser Perth, to a duel? Perth stared back, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. A wiser at 17. You expect me to believe that? Chris raised his spear. I'll prove it to you in this battle. Perth vanished. In an instant, he reappeared right in front of Chris, their eyes locking. Doi gasped in shock. He's so fast. Lind stared bewildered. When did he even move? Perth smiled coldly. Let's see what you've got. He swung his sword. A massive explosion of sparks erupted as Chris barely blocked the blow. The force sent him skidding back, his spear held defensively. Perth swung again, his eyes blazing. What was that you said earlier? He slammed his sword against Chris's spear once more. Chris looked into Perth's eyes, stunned. What is this monstrous power? Another blow sent Chris flying back several meters. This was too dangerous. Chris knew he needed to retreat and reassess just for a moment. But Perth noticed his intention. And where do you think you're going? Perth lunged forward at blinding speed. His sword struck true, sending Chris stumbling backward off balance and crashing to the ground. Commander! Lin cried out in horror. As the dust settled, Chris pushed himself up, wiping his eyes. Perth watched with a smirk. His reaction time and judgment were superb. This one is no ordinary foe. With a simple sidestep, Perth's attack missed its mark. Chris had somehow evaded the devastating blow. It seemed he truly was a wiser. A cold glare met Perth's eyes. A deep cut marred his arm, a fresh scratch on his cheek. Chris glanced at the armband, wondering what his opponent was after. He knew Perth's own armband was amplifying his power. He hadn't anticipated this level of strength. Looking at his foe, Chris knew they were both wisers. But the gap in their power was undeniable. This man, Perth. Chris sensed he had reached the third level. He had mastered the double ability, a technique that literally doubled his strength. With a roar, Perth lunged forward. Panic flared in Chris's eyes. At the very last second, he managed to dodge. Perth's sword crashed against Chris's spear, showering them in sparks. The impact sent Chris staggering back. He grit his teeth, shouting, "Is this all you've got?" Perth responded instantly, slamming a fist into Chris's stomach. "Show me the savagery that killed Sir Ryan," he roared. Chris stared down at his armor in disbelief. It was covered in cracks and abrasions. How had Perth inflicted so much damage even his enchanted armor couldn't withstand the onslaught? Lind watched with wide eyes, horrified. This was the first time she'd seen Chris fight with such desperation. But Alec just smiled, completely unfazed. "This is what we expect from Perth," he mused. "A true master. At the right 8 gates, no squire can even touch him." Chris frowned, clenching his jaw in defiance. He leaped forward, realizing that in this battle, there was no way to escape without sacrifice. Chris unleashed his own technique, his spear a blur of motion. It flew towards Perth with blinding speed. But Perth just smiled, parrying every strike. "Have you recovered from that last blow already?" he taunted. He effortlessly dodged Chris's relentless assault. "You're a persistent one," he admitted. Suddenly, Perth's expression shifted. He saw Chris lunge forward, a deliberate opening in his form. Was he baiting him? Inviting an attack? Perth thrust his sword forward, but it was a trap. Chris twisted his spear, catching Perth's left arm. Perth leaped back as blood sprayed from his wound. He looked at Chris with a new kind of intensity. A puzzled expression crossed his face. "You're braver than you look," he conceded. Chris glared back, his mind racing. In that split second, he had predicted Perth's move and reacted perfectly. He glanced at the wound he'd inflicted. He knew he had injured him. But with the healing power from the second level of wiser proficiency, the damage was almost insignificant. A fearful thought entered Chris's mind. Such shallow attacks were useless against a master like Perth. With a burst of speed, Chris rushed forward again. His movements became a blur. Perth's eyes narrowed. "Is this the same technique you used against Sir Raiden?" Chris rained a storm of blows upon his enemy, holding nothing back. Perth deflected them all, his frustration growing. "You think these cheap tricks will work on me?" he bellowed. But Chris remained silent, his assault never wavering. He unleashed a countless number of strikes, all of which Perth parried. Chris knew. He knew deep down that this dance would never be enough to defeat him. He swung his spear in a wide arc, wondering what it would take to finally destroy his opponent. Perth's blade grazed past his guard, slicing across his torso. A desperate roar escaped Chris's lips. With every ounce of his remaining strength, he struck Perth's sword and shattered it. From the sidelines, Alec cried out in shock, "No!" Perth stared dumbfounded at his broken weapon. His opponent's movements. They had suddenly changed. In that moment, Chris remembered a conversation. He had asked Tequila how to defeat a wiser. Tequila, of all people, would know the answer. His mentor watched his own daughter train on a dummy. "It's not about defeating them," he said. "Run a blade through a wiser or an ordinary man. They die all the same." Tequila's eyes held a menacing glint. "Don't try to win, simply kill them. It's the only way to survive." Chris activated his technique Death Dance.
His spear glowed with a crimson line. He lunged toward Perth as the rhythm of a funeral march filled his mind. But suddenly Perth moved. Even with his shattered sword, he knocked the spear from Chris's hands. He tossed both weapons aside, leaving them both disarmed. Chris stared. It was a bold move. Without warning, Perth drove his fist into Chris's stomach once more. What could he do now? Clenching his jaw, Chris charged head-on. Once the funeral march begins, he thought it cannot be stopped. He slammed his own fist toward the bewildered Perth. His opponent's hand flew up to block, and Chris saw his opening. Perth's left side was now completely exposed. Chris rushed in, driving a powerful kick into his stomach. Perth staggered back, watching in shock as Chris drew a second blade from his belt. The blade began to glow with a brilliant light. Is that a blade art technique? He wondered. The glittering weapon shot upwards from below. A piercing beam of light aimed straight for Perth. From the crowd, Doy's eyes widened in astonishment. Alec and the other soldiers were equally stunned into silence. Suddenly, a man with a mustache tried to shout something. It was Strick, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the soldiers as Chris shouted in triumph. Chris stood over Perth's fallen form. The defeated warrior clutched his stomach. "What is that technique called?" he asked. Chris looked down at him, his expression cold as ice. In a flash of blinding light, blood erupted from Perth's chest. "Impossible!" he gasped. As he collapsed, Alec rushed to his side. Strick's face twisted with rage. "You monster!" he roared just as the castle cavalry charged forth. "All forces attack with everything you've got," Strick bellowed. "We must protect the hero of the fortress wall." But Chris locked eyes with Alec. "Halt!" he commanded. "Where do you think you're going?" a bewildered Alec shot back. "Let me take Perth." Chris's brow darkened. "You dare dishonor our duel?" In an instant, Alec fell to his knees. "I'm begging you," he pleaded, his voice cracking beside Perth's still form. "He is meant to lead the next generation. Please just let me take him," Chris scoffed, pointing a condemning finger. "How cowardly," he sneered. "A commander who staked his family's very honor is now groveling before his enemy?" Alec's jaw tightened, but he remained silent as Chris pressed on, his voice dripping with contempt. "All this for a single soldier. You truly are one of the wolves, just as I suspected." Alec grit his teeth, the insult striking home. He lifted Perth into his arms. "Remember this day," Chris declared ominously. Just then, his own men rushed to his side. "Sir, are you all right? You're bleeding." Chris just waved it off with a wry smile. "Don't make a fuss, it's merely a scratch." But inwardly, he knew a rib had been displaced. More cavalry soldiers galloped towards him. One of the soldiers called out, "Commander Chris, are you well?" He turned, a boisterous laugh escaping him. "Well now, looks like the pandemonium has arrived." Suddenly, another force appeared on the horizon, led by Sly, who charged ahead with the cavalry. Sly's cavalry crashed into the enemy flank. Cries of panic erupted. "Support is coming from the opposite direction." The enemy soldiers scrambled in confusion. "What's happening? We're surrounded. Is this a trap?" Alec shot a venomous glare at Chris. Lynn cried out in alarm. "Sir, what are you doing if they attack the wolves without knowing the full situation?" "Everything will be ruined." But Chris's voice boomed over the chaos, cold and commanding. "The troops are here." Sly looked to Chris for orders. "Attention," Chris commanded. His gaze then fell upon Alec, still cradling the wounded Perth. "Escort the Knights of the Wolf out, with the honor they are due." Sly immediately relayed the order. "All units halt!" Chris's voice echoed across the field. "They have fought with valor. In this fierce battle, they have defended their honor." Alec stared at Chris, stunned by this show of respect. As the commanders returned to their lines, Alec spoke as he departed. "The wolves will remember this honor." Chris offered a faint smile. One of his men approached him. "Sir, what are your orders?" Chris gazed forward at the sea of enemy soldiers rushing towards them. He knew his troops were ready to follow him into the inferno. "We must press the attack." But a sharp pain reminded him. His injury was far more serious than he let on. "Can I even hold out?" Just then, he felt his mana draining rapidly from his leg. He looked down and saw it being absorbed. The seal. The energy is leaking. He quickly placed a hand over his torso, which began to emit a soft light. A green glow enveloped his hand. This feeling, the healing, is faster than before. Suddenly, a system window materialized in front of him. Proficiency in Wise has increased to level 31. A smirk touched Chris's lips. "So, this is the second stage of Wise. The healing power has grown stronger." Just then, Lindo and Deo approached with smiles. Chris's expression hardened. "We're heading back. Back to the battlefield, now. Any objections?" "None, sir," Deo replied without a hint of hesitation. Chris bellowed his next command. "All cavalry assemble, maintain formation, and move out." The camp's commander rushed over, his face etched with worry. "Sir, aren't you pushing yourself too hard?" he continued. "The fortress wall is secure. You can afford to wait to recover your strength." But Chris's gaze was fixed on the horizon. "The war isn't over. For us, there is no rest." Seated on his steed, a crimson aura around him, Chris offered a grim smile. Because the fortress wall isn't the only thing we must protect.
Elsewhere, the Count charged headfirst into the enemy horde, a one-man army carving a path of destruction.
He left screams in his wake, but as he paused for a breath, he saw his weapon was shattered. The enemy swarmed him, shouting, "Get that crazy old man!" Unfazed, the Count readied what was left of his blade. In a flash, he dispatched 2 more soldiers who dared to approach, and they fell with choked cries of pain. He surveyed the chaos and roared, "Ludwig's squad must crush the enemy!" But his command was cut short as he coughed up blood. His vision blurred. In that moment of weakness, an arrow flew straight for his heart. But just as he refocused, Gillen appeared and sliced the arrow clean in 2. The Count wiped the blood from his mouth. "Gillen," he beckoned.
Gillen frantically scanned their surroundings. "My lord, you must not overexert yourself." His warning was drowned out by new shouts. "More enemies are coming." From the rear, Gillen and the Count watched. A soldier suddenly pointed a trembling finger.
Toward the horizon, where a tide of enemy troops surged forward, he screamed a warning. "The Wall army is here!" With Gillen at his side, the Count hears his subordinate's final words. He would have to leave now. And as Gillen departs, the Count looks away, telling him to take care. Gillen walks into the fray without another word, but then paused, vowing to give it his all. The Count turned his gaze back to the battlefield. His expression hardened. He spotted an enemy commander, a menacing scar carved across his face. "At last," the man sneered. "The old lion is finally alone." The Count lowered his gaze, listening to the taunt. "What a pity," the commander continued. "To think the great hero of the fortress wall, Count Ludwig, has become so frail." The scarred man on horseback narrowed his eyes. "Today, I will end your legend with my own 2 hands." A dangerous glint ignited within the Count's eyes. He scoffed. "A bottom feeder like you is no match for me." The commander's lips curled into a cruel smile. He gazed down at the Count, savoring the moment. Elsewhere, the chaos of battle raged. Allied troops on horseback cut through the enemy ranks. Enemies screamed as they fell from their saddles. A lone soldier thought to himself, "There are still so many of them." He saw an ally clench his teeth in agony, begging for mercy, as an enemy blade ran him through. From within a thick shroud of smoke and chaos, a commander roared, "Fall back! Do not break formation!"
A gray-haired soldier with a shield desperately parried an enemy's attack.
He blocked the blow, then countered with a swift strike to his foe's neck. A scream of pain echoed through the din. The commander turned, shouting for the knights. But in that instant, an enemy spear found its mark, each silencing him forever with a cry to die. The gray-haired soldier watched it all happen. He screamed out the commander's name, his face a mask of terror. He didn't even feel the searing pain in his leg, until warm blood splashed across his cheek. He whirled around and saw a wounded enemy on the ground, his blade buried deep in the soldier's leg. Rage eclipsed his fear. He plunged his own sword into the fallen foe's neck. The enemy gurgled as his lifeblood drained away. The soldier collapsed to his knees beside the corpse. He lowered his weapon, panting heavily. "God," he thought, utterly spent. He looked up to see another enemy charging, spear leveled. "Is this my time?" He closed his eyes, accepting his fate. But then a figure on horseback thundered past him.
It was Chris. In a flash of steel, he intercepted the charging soldier. The enemy's head flew from his shoulders.
The soldier could only stare as a crimson rain painted the battlefield. "Reinforcements," he thought in disbelief. They had arrived. Chris's axe became a whirlwind of death, cutting down foes with every swing. The soldier watched in awe. The allied cavalry squad. He saw Docky, his twin axes a blur cleaving through enemy skulls. What are they doing here? He stared in utter shock, trying to process it all. Then he watched Lynn dismount her horse. She walked directly toward the stunned soldier. "It's time to wake up," she said, her voice steady. She asked for his name. "I'm Saxon," he stammered. "Don't you dare give up now, Saxon," Lynn told him. He looked up, surprised. Was it too early to hope he might survive? Lynn knelt beside him, her gaze unwavering. "Our sun will rise again. We have our cavalry now." As if on cue, the sun broke through the clouds. Elsewhere, Chris raced on. His thoughts were grim. "Just a little more. I have to be faster." He saw the brutal melee of allies and enemies. And there, fighting with the strength of a demon, was the Count, battling the enemy general himself. Chris's heart leaped. "Thank God! He's holding on." A smile touched his lips, but it vanished in an instant. An arrow struck his horse. The steed collapsed, but Chris leaped clear. He looked around wildly, and his blood ran cold. A blade ran through a figure. And blood. So much blood erupted. A gasp of pure horror escaped his lips. He saw the blood pouring from the Count as the general overpowered him. "No!" Chris screamed in despair. The Count cried out in agony as blood stained the earth. The general smiled a victorious, bloody grin. He drove his blade deeper and the Count stumbled back. The Count's sword slipped from his grasp, embedding itself in the ground. With a triumphant roar, the general landed the final blow. His weapon pierced the Count's stomach. Chris ran forward, screaming the Count's name. The general leaned in close. "It's over," he declared. But the Count whispered back, "You cheeky pup." "What makes you think this is over?" And he drove his fist squarely into the general's face. The Count sank to one knee, breathing heavily. The general stood in stunned silence, a hand to his jaw, his victory forgotten, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. Fierce battles rage across the fortress, and the enemy general gazes at the weary, blood-soaked Count. He acknowledges that even as enemies, a flicker of surprise crosses his face. He expresses the deepest respect for the Count's unbreakable will, a tenacity that would never be forgotten. With that, he approaches the stooped Count, raising his sword for the final honorable blow. He declares that now he can finally rest in peace. But in that instant, a black shadow streaks through the air, flashing right before the general's eyes. He stares in shock as it erupts in a cloud of violet smoke. The general is stunned by this sudden turn. The purple mist spreads, forcing the general to shield his face, desperate not to inhale the strange substance. He looks around frantically and sees Chris descending from above, his spear ready, his eyes glowing with golden light. The general spots him just as Chris bursts from the smoke like a phantom. The enemy commander thinks in horror. The black smoke devil. He tries to evade Chris's attack, but a furious barrage of spear strikes scatters the mist, shattering his defenses and breaking his weapon. The general is thrown to the ground, screaming in agony. He looks up to see Chris plummeting toward him spear first. He can only wonder, what is he doing here? In the next moment, Chris plunges his spear directly into the general's heart. His body begins to dissolve as a shadowy graph emerges from within him, watching as Chris delivers the finishing blow. With the general defeated, Chris turns his attention to the Count, shouting his name. He rushes to his side, seeing the dire state he's in. But as he kneels, the Count's eyes close, and he begins to laugh. He finds it ironic that in this final moment it wasn't his son or Gillen, but Chris who came for him. Chris grasps his hand, staring at him intently. A small smile forms on his face as he says, "It's all right." They look out over the battlefield. As the Allied army clashes with the enemy in a symphony of destruction, the Count asks what it was all for: to protect this fortress wall, to protect all of their lives. A duty Chris will now take upon himself. The Count's eyes open, filled with a new resolve. He declares that he owes Chris a great debt. Chris simply tilts his head and says he can pay it back later. On the verge of death, the Count gazes at him as Chris gently lays him on the ground. He places his weapon down and looks upon the dying noble. Just then, enemy soldiers rush towards them, their voices filled with rage. "The general is dead!" they scream. "It was all because of Chris. He must be killed." They charge forward, roaring in fury, vowing to take the Count's head as vengeance. But one soldier freezes as Chris appears right before him, only to vanish in the blink of an eye. Before he can process it, a powerful fist slams into him. Chris now holds a blade, his expression deadly serious. With a single fluid motion, he strikes the soldier's neck, severing his head. Two more soldiers lunge with their spears, but Chris effortlessly dodges their assault. He dashes toward one of them, his blade flashing, and sends another head flying as the soldier screams in agony, bleeding out on the cold stone. He collapses, a weapon still lodged in his neck. Now a horde of enemy soldiers surrounds Chris, but he simply picks up a spear. He roars for them to listen. By order of Count Ludwig of the 8 families, this place is now under the protection of Squire Chris. With a swift movement, Chris carves a line into the ground with his spear tip. Anyone tired of living is welcome to cross it. The enemy soldiers charge, screaming that he's all alone, that he's as good as dead. But Chris meets their charge with an unwavering gaze, then explodes into motion. In an instant, 2 of them fall before the others even realize what's happening. They turn in confusion to see 2 of their own, already dead on the ground. He is a whirlwind of death cleaving through limbs and torsos, leaving only screams of pain in his wake. He surges forward, taking heads with every swing. Panic begins to set in among the enemy ranks. They scream for reinforcements, for help. But Chris's relentless assault continues, his spear a blur of motion, claiming life after life. He hurls his spear at a fleeing soldier, impaling him squarely in the back. The man falls screaming. Chris pauses for a moment, sighing heavily, surrounded by a mountain of corpses. But a new shout draws his attention. He turns to see a colossal soldier in gray armor, wielding a massive weapon. With a single blow, it smashes into the ground, creating a huge crack and a cloud of dust. This was a giant of a man, the knight known as Pedro. Chris watches as the giant swings a massive chain-linked weapon, which suddenly lashes out and wraps tightly around his arm. Chris looks down in surprise as Pedro roars, "I will avenge the general." Chris's expression turns deadly serious. With a surge of power, he pulls the chain back, shocking Pedro. The giant runs at him, But Chris clenches his chain-bound hand into a fist and unleashes a powerful counterattack of his own.
A brutal kick lands caving in his stomach. He screams, crashing to the earth, his armor dented from the sheer force of the blow.
Gasping for breath, his head hangs in defeat. He forces his gaze upward, desperately begging for forgiveness. The answer is a cold final no.
Chris smashes his foe with a devastating blow from his mace. He raises his spear, roaring a challenge.
Those who seek revenge step forward now. The surrounding soldiers hesitate, frozen in their tracks. He dares them to attack for the sake of glory. With a furious shout, he vows to crush every last one of them. One soldier is caught by the mace. It connects squarely with his head, and blood erupts from the wound.
As he screams in agony, Chris turns to see a new wave of soldiers swarming him. They charge forward without hesitation.
He cuts them down one by one. Just as their screams fill the air, a volley of arrows darkens the sky. Chris deflects them all. With a blur of his spear, he slices them to pieces. Gritting his teeth, his gaze locks onto two archers protected by a pair of knights. Enraged, the knights charge at Chris. He meets them head-on, swinging his mace with deadly force. The blow shatters a knight's helmet. As the man screams, bleeding profusely, Chris plants a foot firmly on his chest. The enemy soldiers stare, stunned by this show of dominance. Chris then picks up his mace and hurls it with lethal accuracy. It smashes directly into an archer's face. The other stands frozen, paralyzed with fear. Chris then drops to one knee, and the soldiers behind him surge forward, screaming, "Die!" as they try to seize the opening. But Chris explodes upward in a whirlwind of steel. His spear decapitates one foe and slices through two more torsos. He carves a path forward, taking another soldier's head. Just then, an arrow flies past, finding its mark. The man on the horse watches the battle unfold, just as a soldier rushes to his side with an urgent report. Nearby, Lind knocks another arrow. A comrade yells, "Great, let's join Chris." A soldier shouts to the mounted commander, "Sir, the second-in-command has an urgent message." He turns to ask, "What is it?" The soldier's words are grave. The Count has fallen on the battlefield. The news strikes the deputy commander like lightning. He's terrified. "How?" he stammers. Panic grips his heart. If the Count is truly dead, what chance do they have of winning? The soldier continues his report. "However, sir, thanks to the help of an allied cavalryman, we are gradually driving back the enemy army." The deputy commander is utterly baffled by this turn of events.
"We still have cavalry left," he asks. "It's a squad of chorus scouts, sir." His gaze falls upon Chris's squad in the distance.
He sees Lin Dig and his wolf fighting fiercely. "No," the soldier clarifies. "This squad is led by Squire Chris." Another ally shouts a Chris's name as he attacks a soldier. They rally, crying out, "Chris has paved the way. We just need to survive." And survive they do. Chris becomes a storm of destruction, cutting down scores of enemy soldiers with his weapon. They fall before him, screaming in agony. Dig is right behind him, his mighty axe severing his enemy's limbs. Meanwhile, Lin's arrows fly true, each one finding an enemy's head, killing them in a single shot. Chris surges forward with his spear tearing through the enemy ranks and leaving a river of blood in his wake. The second-in-command watches this onslaught, thinking with shock, "Those guys, they are a squad of cavalrymen." He watches them push forward, led by Chris slaughtering the enemy. He realizes they are their newfound hope. The enemy commander sits on his horse as a knight shouts, "Sir, their commander is too strong." His face is etched with worry as he looks to the gray-haired general whose eyes are closed. "What should we do?" he pleads. After a moment, the general's eyes snap open, burning with rage as he glares at the battlefield.
"Retreat," he commands. All forces fall back. With that, Chris watches the enemy army turn and flee.
As huge clouds of dust rise, Chris breathes heavily. A familiar blue window appears before his eyes. A system notification. The required amount of experience points has been accumulated. A smiling Lind walks up to him. "Is this really the end?" she asks. "Did we win?" Staring ahead. Chris replies, "Yes, it's finally over." All around them, the allied troops erupt in cheers, raising their hands to the sky. The enemy is retreating. They shout with joy, "We've done it, we've won!" As Chris watches them celebrate, his gaze turns somber. One of the deputy commanders approaches the Count's body with Gillen. They weep over their fallen lord. Gillen glares at Chris, tired and angry. Chris and the other soldiers bow their heads in mourning. They look upon the body of the Count, lying still covered in blood. Sometime later, a crowd gathers at a huge altar where a priest delivers a eulogy. He devoted his entire life to protecting these lands. The next day, Count Ludwig's funeral was held. His young son stands beside Gillen, and a woman all dressed in black. The boy cries silently, clenching his teeth and biting his lip to stifle his sobs. Standing nearby with Lind Chris wears a black ribbon. Civilians had been barred from attending the solemn ceremony. For 3 long days, drinking was forbidden. Every soldier wore a black ribbon on their shoulder, a solemn sign of mourning. In memory of the departed hero. 3 days later, a man with a thick mustache unrolls a message. It spoke of the eldest son of the Count. With false pride, Count Ludwig declares his smiling son has taken his rightful place. But his heir slams a fist on the armrest, his face contorted with rage. You mean to tell me?
You still haven't found him. The nobles surrounding them smirk condescendingly. Why is one man's achievement score even worth discussing? One scoffs, another adds,
I heard he single-handedly cut down hundreds of soldiers. That his small squad of 4?
repelled an army of 2,000. They call him the youngest swordmaster. I'd like to see it for myself.
The Count whirls around roaring, find Chris at once. In his mind, a plan was forming. He had to have him.
Even in a minor role, a man like that could elevate the status of his entire house.
This was a chance he couldn't afford to miss. Meanwhile, in a rowdy tavern, Ilya listens to Lynn's grand tales. Standing on a chair, Lind mimes pulling a bowstring. And from the top of that hill, he boasts, I loosed a single arrow that flew true, felling the enemy commander in an instant. Ilya just rolls her eyes. Just then, the tavern doors swing open. A man announces he comes on behalf of Count Ludwig himself. The soldier, a man with a thick black mustache, stands at the entrance. The squire's squad members.
We'll report the location of your commander immediately. Dio barely looks up from his chicken leg.
Another one. Lynn sighs while Elia gestures with her fingers. Is he deaf or just ignoring us? She elbows Lind, pointing at Deo, who's still eating. Just ignore him, Lynn shouts back at the soldier. How many times do we have to say it? We don't know where he is. We're wondering the same thing. The soldier shoves a piece of paper forward, his voice rising with fury. Are you mocking me? This is a direct order from the Count. As Deo slowly rises from his seat, Lind watches in surprise. The soldier presses on, in case of insubordination. Lind mutters, this is about to get ugly. In a flash, Dio hurls his axe. It thuds into the wooden wall, inches from the soldier's head. The soldier freezes his threat dying in his throat. He stares wide-eyed at the quivering axe, his bravado gone. From a corner table, Elena smiles at the scene. Please forgive my comrade, she says calmly. He doesn't handle his liquor well. Enraged, the drunken Deo grabs another axe. Too noisy, he slurs. I've got another one right here. He hiccups, and the soldier lets out a terrified shriek.
Elia looks at Deo impressed. Wow, you're so cool. She turns to Lind, who's calmly sipping his drink.
You really have no idea where Chris is, Lind nods. He just told us to wait, said he was... He looks up with a sly grin. Pretty good. And that he was off to meet a beautiful woman.
Deep within the dungeons, a man in a black cape walks down a dark, damp corridor toward an iron gate.
He slips a few gold coins into the guard's hand. The guard grunts, just for a moment. Understood, the man replies. Inside the cell, a girl with blonde hair lies on the floor. I'm not receiving guests today, she says without turning. You should leave. The cloaked man approaches the bars.
From the shadows, his voice echoes. Why did you let them catch you? I'm certain you could have easily escaped.
The girl, her brown eyes flashing with surprise, turns to face him. Who are you?
The man slowly lowers his hood. As she peers into the darkness, the face revealed is Chris.